NIB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That right there, that's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we're here to talk some Notre Dame football, Ryan. And we've had an interesting week. We talked quarterback on Tuesday. Have to kick it off at the most important position, right? In the position that's going to get the most conversation. And then yesterday we were going to talk about a defensive position, but then Notre Dame released their 2023 schedule, so we decided to talk about that. But we are back on track, and what we're doing, just a reminder, is sort of a state of the program look at Notre Dame, and we're going kind of position by position. And I think the position that I think makes the most sense to start off on defense is not the strength of the defense, which was we anticipate to be cornerback, potentially the defensive line, but the position that could ultimately be the most important to the team's success next year, and whose improvement, I should say, is most important to the team's defensive unit success next year, and that's linebacker. And Ryan, it was a really fascinating year when you look at linebacker play, because coming into the year, that was the one position I kind of felt, along with the D-line, that you felt like, okay, I know what we're going to get.
Right.
Can it take that next step? That's the question. Well, it took a step, all right, but it took a step back, and it ended up hurting the defense. And so now the question, Ryan, is why? And that's important to know why, because if you don't know why, you can't fix it. Figure out why, address it, and get this unit back on track, because there's too much talent in the room, and there's too much depth now with freshmen becoming sophomores, and it's too important of a position in this defense to not really spend a lot of time saying, how do we get this right? Because if the linebacker play doesn't get better, I'm sitting there thinking about, like, let's say Notre Dame is able to out-talent 11 of their 12 teams on their schedule next year, get to the playoff, and then I'm going to have to watch this group that we saw in 2022 try to cover Brock Bowers in a semifinal playoff game, right? I don't feel great about that. And then also try to stop Georgia's run game. So this group has the potential to be much better, Ryan. The question is, will it? And I think that's the biggest question this offseason when it comes to linebackers.
I mean, I think that it's so important to talk about the linebacker position for Notre Dame, especially, is because, I mean, one, inherently, kind of like what we talked about with quarterback, linebacker, especially middle linebacker, look, they're kind of the leadership role of a defense. You help get things set. You make the calls usually. You're usually the red dot if you're talking about the NFL side of things, right? So leadership qualities at the linebacker position, especially Mike linebacker. And then what we saw from Notre Dame in 2022 is that if that is an inkling of what it's going to look like moving forward, hopefully just better, is that this is a linebacker-driven defense, right? Like, the linebackers are going to make a lot of plays for this defense. So if that is the case, where you're going to depend on your linebackers to make a lot of plays, they need to play a higher brand of football, right? And especially when you have so many smart linebacker guys on the staff, right? I mean, it has to be better than what it was in 2022, and there's certainly talent there, no question.
But Ryan, that's the whole point of why we we thought there was good talent, like not elite talent. There was no Jeremiah Wusu at the position. There was no Jalen Smith, but there was no question that we expected it to be better than it was. And you look at it and you're like, man, part of the optimism we had was, J.D. Bertrand moving to Mike. I think it's going to benefit him. And I think by the end of the year did. I think J.D. Bertrand was a lot better than people give him credit for last year. Not good enough, but better than people give him credit for. Maris comes back. He's really athletic. At the very least, he's going to be as good as he was in 2020, right? And then Jack Kaiser was steady. But man, the coaching and the incoming freshman class, and we saw very little of the freshman class, and the coaching was very disappointing, to say the least, because it was like, you got Marcus Freeman, you got James Laurinaitis, you got Al Golden. Of course the linebacker position is going to be good. Right. And it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, that's the maddening part, is that, I mean, literally Marcus Freeman, and I know he's not the linebacker coach anymore, right? But he still has his hand in that position.
He's the head coach. And
exactly.
Yes, exactly.
And he certainly has hand in roster construction, right? Like, those players that are now in that room over the last couple of years are because in large part due to Marcus Freeman, right? Like, that's the players that he wanted in the room. So didn't see a ton of the younger guys, obviously. But when you have a Marcus Freeman who has made his up to him being the head coach of Notre Dame, what had drawn everyone to him is the fact that, like, you played linebacker at a high level in college. You played in the NFL for a cup of coffee before an injury, and then you developed linebackers and were considered a very good defensive mind, which I think he really is. Al Golden 12 months ago was coaching in the Super Bowl, less than 12 months ago. As a linebackers coach. And we never even talk about this. He also played at Penn State. You don't think he was around some good linebackers when he was at Penn State as a football player? I mean, they've just been rolling through great linebackers at Penn State for as long as anyone can remember, pretty much, right? So you have all that experience on top of the fact that you also got James Laurinaitis in as a grad assistant, who is a Pro Bowl linebacker at the NFL level. All-time leading tackler for the Rams, was a All-American linebacker at Ohio State. You have three guys that know the position inside and out, and quite frankly, it needs to be better. It has to be, right? And there's no reason it can't be, because I've seen Al Golden work with guys like Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt and make them good football players for the Cincinnati Bengals. I've seen Marcus Freeman in his time as a coach develop linebackers at a high level when he was at Cincinnati, and then into what he did in 2021 with the linebackers here at Notre Dame, which gave you optimism coming into this year. And then not to mention that, hey, James Laurinaitis is a little bit of a wild card coming into this year because he's never really been a coach, right? But at worst, you're like, that if that guy's just a supplementary piece to helping the guys see the game a little bit better, that's three linebackers that have been there, done that, three linebacker coaches that have been there, done that. So I don't know what the disconnect was, and I know we'll talk a lot about some of the things that it could have been or some things that we think it is, but the point blank period to it, the baseline, is that linebackers need to get a lot better in this defense. If not, you are really hindering how good the defense can be.
I agree. Because as you mentioned, Ryan, to your point just there, there's not every defense needs its linebackers to be really good players. Just be smart, just hit your gap, just do your job. But this is a defense that is very linebacker centered. And they do use their linebackers to attack and get downhill and do all those type of things. And they just didn't play with enough consistency and a lot of times with enough force to be effective. And what you have to be able to do as an evaluator, as a fan, whoever's going to have a comment, a public, if you're going to verbally or through a text or a tweet or some other public forum have an opinion about linebacker play, you need to know what you're talking about. And that means just because a guy is playing slow doesn't mean he is slow. You need to be able to differentiate, is this guy giving me everything he's got and he's playing hard and he's just slow? Or is this guy looking slow because he doesn't know where he's supposed to go? And that's what you have to kind of figure out and differentiate. Notre Dame did not have a speed problem at linebacker in 2022. Not even close. At certain spots with Jack Kaiser, for example, Jack Kaiser doesn't get beat because he's slow. Jack Kaiser gets beat because he's short and doesn't have very good length. That's when Jack Kaiser gets beat. J.D. Bertrand doesn't have a speed problem. I'm telling you all, it's like Drew, people used to say the same thing about Drew White. And then he went out and ran a 40 times faster than I think every Georgia linebacker that got drafted last year, I believe, right? Yep. Maybe one was faster than he was. He was definitely faster than Nakobe Dean.
Yes, he was faster.
And so it's like, well, it wasn't a speed problem. What was the problem with Drew? He wasn't long enough. He wasn't powerful at the point of attack enough. So I get tired of the whole speed thing being the excuse that people turn to. Notre Dame's problem is not speed. It's not a lack of speed at linebacker. It's guys that weren't playing with the necessary instincts, consistency, or job assignment execution needed to be effective. And that combination is what got them in trouble. And if you're just going to lazily say it's speed, okay, fine. You can say that. It may make you feel better. But that's why putting Prince Collie and Jalen Sneed on the field doesn't fix anything. Because the problem is there's a disconnect between what was being taught and what was happening on the field.
Right.
And it wasn't about speed because, hey, for all of Jalen Sneed's speed, did you watch him let a linebacker just run right by him up the seam in the bowl game? Right? I mean, he's fast, he's speedy, but he got beat by 15 yards by a tight end up the seam. Why? Because he didn't execute his assignment. He wasn't certain of what he was supposed to do. And that's the whole point. And so you have to be able to look as an evaluator and say, okay, is this guy giving me everything he's got? He's just slow? Or is this guy playing with hesitation? Is this guy playing with uncertainty? Yep. And the problem with Notre Dame's guys is twofold. At times, Jack and JD were playing with uncertainty. For Marist, it was never uncertainty. It was rarely uncertainty. It was more of just about he's running somewhere that he's not supposed to go.
He doesn't know what he's doing. Right?
No clue.
Yeah.
No clue.
Yeah.
And there's this expression, well, if you're going to make a mistake, make it 1,000 miles an hour. Not really at linebacker. Because if you hit the A gap 1,000 miles an hour and you're supposed to hit the B gap, that's a touchdown. You know what I mean? Like, and so that's the thing is it just now can the talent linebacker get better? Yeah, of course. I'm not saying J.D. Bertrand is Manti Te'o. I'm not saying Jack Kaiser's Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah or Maris Lufaus, Jalen Smith. Not saying that. What I'm saying, however, is the talent wasn't the problem in 2022. And that's where we're going to start this show, Ryan, is because there has got to be a better job done at the coaching level of making sure that your linebackers can execute what you're asking them to do at a high level.
Right.
Because I don't care if J.D. Bertrand knows your defense inside and out and can get everybody lined up on where they need to be. The reality is he wasn't able to play with the assignment correctness enough to be the player he's capable of being. Simple fact. Well, whose fault is that? Is that his? Y'all keep telling me how smart he is, and I believe it to be true. So if he's not able to then execute, if he's supposedly a smart player that can run, and you and I know both things are true, everyone we talk to will say those two things are true, then why isn't he playing better? And it's because there's a lot of, I don't know if he knows what he's doing here, or it looks like they're actually asking him to kind of play 3 different gaps on this play, depending on which way the ball goes. And all linebackers will play 2, right? You have if the ball's run at you gap, and if the ball's run away from you gap, right? I mean, that's pretty much the truth. But it just seems like they put a lot more on their plates, which is what you ask NFL linebackers to do.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's got to get corrected. So to me, until they fix the coaching disconnect, the fundamental disconnect, then I don't think that we're going to see a whole lot change other than just they have a little bit more firm grasp of the defense. That's it. Now that's going to result in somewhat better play, but not better enough for this team to go compete for championship, which is ultimately the standard every position group needs to be held to. Sure. Is this group good enough to go compete for a championship at a coaching player level? You know, or should I say, is it good enough to be part of a championship team unit is a better way of saying it. And that's where the disconnect is here, Ryan, with the linebackers is they don't play anywhere close, and the coaches didn't do anything about making those changes. And so you've created a sense of there's no accountability at the position either. There's no accountability for Maris to play as bad as he did. He never sat. So if you're a young linebacker, you're like, well, I mean, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. Yeah. That guy screws up every game, and he keeps playing, and I don't play. And that's not the kind of culture you want to create. And so to me, we can talk all we want about this player, that player, the other player, and we'll get into that. But until that changes, Ryan, I don't – until you just get more instinctive players, which they just recruited and they had in the freshman class, I don't know how much of this changes, Ryan. I really don't.
It's maddening, isn't it? Because you saw 2 different cases with the 3 starting linebackers this year of, like you said, you have J.D. Bertrand and Jack Kaiser that are – look, there's always overcompensating traits for players that are lacking something, right? Those players both lack length. I think we agree with that. And I know you just said it, so I know you agree with me. That they don't have the biggest tackle radiuses. They can't play outside their frame a ton. They don't have the range from just body perspectives, right? For players like that, you need to have an overcompensating trait, and usually it's instincts. Like I think of James Laurinaitis, Brian, a guy that we just talked about, right? James Laurinaitis was not the most athletic linebacker of all time, but he was always in the right spot. Like that's why he was a good football player, you know? So for guys like J.D.
Marcus Freeman.
Exactly.
Marcus Freeman was not an elite athlete at linebacker at Ohio State, but he had over 100 tackles his last year because he was really smart, knew where to go.
Yep.
And he was a good athlete. He was a good athlete.
Good overall athlete. But, I mean, for JD and Jack, they need to understand where they are on the football field at all times because that will overcompensate for the lack of length. But then you look at Maris Lufaus, who's the complete opposite, right? Like he can make some plays at times where you're just like, that guy just made that play because he is long and he is explosive. Like that's why he made that play. Didn't read the play well. And if he did read the play well, he'd probably be a darn good football player, but he's what he is because he's not instinctive at all. Where's the disconnect, right? Because you're telling me, and you covered him coming out of high school. I remember J.D. Bertrand was thought of as a smart player coming out of the state of Georgia, right? Like that was kind of his thing. Jack Kaiser, I know, was a small school kid, but I think that he had that instinctual
Jack's
kind
a good
of
athlete.
yeah.
Right. He's not Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah explosive,
Right.
but he's a good athlete.
Yeah. So what's the disconnect with understanding what is expected of you on the football field? Because for everyone out there, and I will say this, I love the linebacker position. I do. Because what people don't understand is that it isn't just about the length and the speed, right? You're seeing the linebacker position, honestly, at the NFL level, get a little smaller now, right? Like the Devin Whites of the world, as the 6-foot linebackers are becoming more and more out there. And it's not because length and size doesn't matter. It's because instinctual ability on the second level is so important. Because the one thing, if I'm a safety or a nickel at times, right? If I see something a little bit slower, I still have time to react because I'm off and I have a little bit more space to work with. So as long as if I'm a really good athlete, I can still make up that ground because I have time to process. When you're at linebacker, your heels are four yards off the ball, maybe 5. You're playing heels at 4 or heels at 5. And if you have a bad read, play's over with, man. That guy's going to break the second level and you look stupid at that point, right? So instincts are so important on the second level because you don't have time to read. You don't have time to read, misread, and then read again, right? Like you need to make a good read and get downhill and make the play that you need to make. It's a quick position. And if you don't have that, you're dead in the water. So my question is, and to your point, Brian, what's the disconnect between understanding what is expected of you on the field? Because until you see the game fast, you can't play fast. And right now, I don't think the linebackers are seeing the game fast, and they certainly aren't playing fast consistently.
I think when you look at a guy like Devin White, you mentioned he's 6 foot, right? If you can run, you can get away with certain things. But he also has very long arms, and I think that's something that people need to understand is there's a difference between being tall and being long. And height matters on certain plays, but not most. If you're long, so you look at him, he's got at least a 2-inch advantage on his arm, on each arm over Drew White, for example, who had barely 30-inch arms. Devin White's over 32. But then you look at a guy like Maris Luafau, really long, really fast, really explosive, not a good football player right now. Yep. And so it gets down to where, like, okay, then why are you asking him to do those things? Mm-hmm. That's the other part is if you're going to play him, right? Because here's at some point in time, you just stop blaming Marist. And you're like, dude, you're putting him out there. This is on you. You're putting him out there week after week after week. And with the exception of like a little 2-3 game stretch in October, November, he was the same guy every week. He was the same guy making the same mistakes in the bowl game he's been making all year. Whose fault is that? Right. Because here's one of two things is happening. Either A, he's not listening to you and just doing what he wants to do, which should result in him being benched. Or B, you're not doing a good enough job of getting him to execute the things in games that he must do in practice. I can't think of another reason to justify playing him at this point in time. So whose fault is that? Again, it comes down to it's a coaching problem. Either A, he's not doing what he needs to do, and you just decide not to do anything about it, or B, you're the reason he's doing that. And so until that's what I say, until that gets fixed, all this other stuff that we're going to talk about with the players doesn't matter. You can tell me, like I've had somebody who I banned, was talking about, well, you just get these guys out of here and get and put these other guys in. And it's like, what does that fix? If seniors couldn't execute the defense, you're telling me that a bunch of freshmen will?
Right.
Right. And so again, because the problem is not just the players. And that's what drives me nuts about fans sometimes is you automatically just go, well, the player sucks, bench him. No, it's not always the case. Sometimes it's the player doesn't suck, but A, he's inexperienced, or B, he's not being put in position to be successful. He's not being asked to do the things that make him a good player. If you recruit Keenan Reynolds into your offense and you say, hey, I'm going to run the same offense with you that I did with Jimmy Clausen, guess what? He's not going to be very good. Is that a Keenan Reynolds problem or you as an offensive coach problem? Right? No, I'm going to put him in an offense that says this kid is a freaky athlete, and I'm going to let him go run this type of offense that allows the quarterback to run. Like when Al Borges was trying to turn Denard Robinson into a pocket passer, and then they'd get frustrated that he wasn't more effective. Hey, that was not a Denard Robinson problem. That was an Al Borges problem.
Do you remember Khalil Tate? Khalil Tate in Arizona was another one, dude. Yeah. He was a dynamic runner, and then all of a sudden they're like, you know what? You're a pocket quarterback now. Yes. You're not allowed to run.
Yes. And guess what? All of a sudden, he wasn't good anymore. And so my point is it's a very lazy thing to do to just assume. Sometimes it is a guy's not good enough. Sometimes that's true. That's fine. The right guard last year for Notre Dame just wasn't very good. It's okay to say that, but it shouldn't automatically be your go-to that they all suck. If the entire starting lineup sucks, and they've always sucked, that's one thing. But J.D. Bertrand and Jack Kaiser, to me, regressed in some areas this year. Sure. Now, like with Jack, in certain roles, Jack Kaiser is a really good football player. When they allow him to tack off the edge and play in the box, he's actually a really good football player. Mm-hmm. When he gets out in space, he has problems. So stop asking him to play in space because he's not long enough. It's not that he can't run with guys. He's just not long enough. So stop putting him there. Put somebody else there.
Range comes from different ways, right? It's not just about foot speed. It's about that length. Like you can play outside your frame. Like I just want people to understand that it's not just about foot speed. It's not
because there's times Jack's in position, but then the quarterback throws it out in front and he just doesn't have the length to get out there and get to it. Or they throw a seam route and the guy goes up and catches it and he's not long enough to make a play on it. Where Maris can make those plays with his length. And Maris at times will overcome being out of position and still make a play because of his length and athleticism. And so here's the thing. At what point in time do I stop blaming Jack Kaiser for getting beaten coverage? And I start saying, why are you putting him in this situation again where he struggles? Put him in the box. And if you don't think he can play in the box, then you can't play him. Or you make him a niche player, which they did a little bit later in the year, and he was more effective. Mm-hmm. Okay, that works. So those are the things that kind of frustrate me a little bit, Ryan, is we've kind of got in this thing where let's just yell at Maris and let's yell and say JD sucks and Jack sucks and put in the freshman. Okay, that would have been a disaster. Right. Because they would have made even more mistakes and their talent would have been negated even more because, again, there was a disconnect with what was being taught to what was being executed on Saturdays. And until that gets addressed, the linebacker play is going to not be as good. Now, the hope that I have is that Al Golden and James Laurinaitis are now, it's kind of like what we said with Al Washington, right? Who also didn't do a very good job last year. But it's more of okay, now you're going into year 2. You know these players better. You know what they can do. Let's go. You now make the changes. Say, hey, what was I doing that was causing this? And make some changes. And it goes back to what we had said in a show recently, Ryan. They need to get back to fundamentals. Yes. They need to get back to basics. And say, until we get these things down, block destruction, proper, taking good angles to the football, tackling without grabbing a freaking face mask. Please, Will Linebacker, stop tackling and grabbing face masks. What are you doing to allow that to happen? What are you doing that's causing these guys to be out of position? And fix that. Then build on the scheme. And if they do that, they'll be fine. And then the other part of that too is if your system is now this is where we'll talk about the younger players. And so what we're not saying the younger players shouldn't have played or don't play the young guys. It's more of that doesn't fix anything is the point because of how it's being installed and coached. Putting Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler in doesn't fix anything. Jalen Sneed got burned up the seam on a play and got 2 personal fouls in the game he played. One personal foul I thought was dumb, meaning I didn't think they should have called it. Not that it was dumb on Jalen, just shouldn't have been called. I'll live with the occasional over-aggressive personal foul if it's not dirty. And I didn't think the one on the sideline that Jalen got was dirty. I just thought he was just being a little too aggressive. But the other mistakes he made were ones where you're like, why are you asking him to make that? Why are you asking him to play that route? Why, put him in the field and say, see ball, get ball. That's what Jalen Sneed should be doing. Have somebody else handle a double move or something like that, right? But we saw that because he wasn't quite sure how to handle certain situations, which comes from 2 things. Number 1, well, we already talked about. Number 2, because you didn't play him enough during the regular season in some sort of niche role. Yep. And that's the other frustrating thing is if you have athletes like Nolan Ziegler and Jalen Sneed, and you can't find some sort of role for them after Bo Bauer's been lost for the year and Prince Colley's dealing with concussion issues and Maris is playing as bad as he did, and you still couldn't figure out a way to get them on the field because they couldn't execute your defense, then they're not the problem. I'm going to say it again. They're not the problem. You are. This is college football, not the NFL. Yeah. And if you can't figure out a way to get those guys on the field some way, somehow, And you can, got to put more weight on, blah, blah, blah. Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah was an All-American at 208 pounds as a linebacker. So stop coming at me with all, well, this guy needs to get bigger or whatever the case may be. The coaching is the issue. The manner in which the scheme is installed and the demands they have on the linebackers is the problem. Now, you can't just play two looks. There needs to be some ability to adjust and adapt. But there's too much of that going on. There's too much responsibility on their shoulders, and they can't play. And until that gets fixed, Ryan, it doesn't matter if it's Jalen Sneed or Nolan Ziegler or J.D. Bertrand or Maris Luafau or Jack Kaiser or Jaden Osbury or Drake Bowen or Preston Zinter or whoever else, right? It's going to be the same thing. This guy's just going to make more splash plays than that guy. Right. That's all that's going to be different. But it's still going to be inconsistent, so not good enough. So that, to me, is going to be the biggest question I have. I don't even care right now who starts at linebacker in the spring or in the fall. Because if that doesn't get fixed, then we're going to have a problem. Now, if they fix that, then that's when the younger players have a chance to compete. Because until that gets fixed, they're going to have no chance to compete for a starting job. And you're going to end up seeing guys leave and all that other kind of stuff. So there's a lot of reasons why those things have to get fixed, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, it's laid out perfectly, man. Like it, and also it's incredibly frustrating moving forward too, because again, I know people want to throw guys like Maris and JD under the bus and stuff. And like, I get it, man. If they're not playing well, I understand the frustration. All right. I understand it. But at the end of the day, you've recruited one of the best linebacker classes you've had in some time in 2022, getting a 4-man class of studs, right? Stud athletes. And then you followed that up with another incredible 3-man class in 2023. You can yell, replace this guy, replace that guy. Eventually, they're going to be out of excuses of why this guy isn't good or that guy isn't producing. They're already out of
excuses for me. They're so out of excuses right now, in my opinion.
And you're going to start to, and if the linebacker position does not get more productive and does not get better and does not get more thorough with understanding what is expected, you are going to lose players, right? You're going to lose players, and it's been one of the biggest momentum builders that you've had over the last 2 recruiting cycles is how well you're recruiting the linebacker position. You are getting some outstanding athletes on the second level in such a volume too that you can afford to put a Junior Tuihalamaka, Joshua Burnham at Viper, right? Like you can afford that because you've gotten so much depth. But at some point, potential has to actualize into production. It has to happen. And I was bigger on Maris Luafau than just about anyone coming into this season. You know, I thought he was going to be an incredible football player if he hit his ceiling. But at some point, that upside that we've been talking about for 4 years, has to actualize. If it doesn't, then it doesn't matter anymore. Right. It doesn't. And it's not all on Maris, though. It's not all on this player, that player. It's about the people in the room with him every single day that are helping him see the game. Because, Brian, I mean, we could talk about not understanding scheme, but there is a lot of times this season where I'm just like, I think they've given up on the linebackers being able to read stuff. And they're just like, you know what? You just blitz. And it's
blitz. Yeah. And it'll work out someplace, but then that couple times where they hit the wrong gap or team figures it out or whatever, they're going to burn you. And that's what USC did. USC found a way to get outside of it.
Yes. And honestly, Notre Dame wasn't even that great of a blitzing team from the second level. No. They really weren't. So, I mean, if I'm blitzing J.D. Bertrand and Jack Kaiser a ton, why wouldn't I just blitz Jalen Sneed, right? Like, Jalen Sneed can blitz through a B gap if you tell him which gap to go through.
Who's with all – I mean, look, here's the deal. Like, 2 things can be true at once. Here's what's true. Jack Kaiser and J.D. Bertrand are not slow. They're not slow. They can run every bit plenty well enough to be good football players at a place like Notre Dame. No question. But I also still think Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler are better athletes, even better athletes, and they're longer athletes, right? I mean, so 2 things can be true at once. You can say, hey, this guy isn't struggling because of a lack of speed, and still say, but this dude's even faster. This dude's even more athletic. And to me, that's kind of where I'm at this point in time is, like you said, like you've got to give those guys a chance to go play, right? Because if you're gonna, like you said, like Maris, he would blitz and just like run into people, like literally like run right through people. So either A, you're teaching him to do that, or B, you're allowing him to do that because he continues to do it and you don't do anything about it. And that's my thing. That's because, like, when you look at on offense, there was a few guys that people were calling to get benched in the first couple games, including us. The way that Jaden Thomas played in week 2, I wouldn't have played him the next week. I was that disgusted with how he played in week 2, just not blocking the back, just giving up that pick 6 by not fighting for the ball, all those kind of things. People were ready for Zeke Correll to get benched. And based on his level of play, I got it. I understood. He didn't play very well. And same thing with Josh Lugg. By the middle of the year, however, their play had gotten much better, especially Zeke and Jaden. But all of them got much better. Why? Good coaching, right?
Yes.
They say, hey, look, here's what we're going to do. And then eventually Tommy Rees figured out, okay, here's where Jaden's at his best. And so as the year went on, he started getting more and more action in the slot where he's best. Where did the big mistake he made in the game against Marshall come from? It's him playing in the boundary as an outside guy. And so they say, okay, look, we can keep asking him to do things that he's not good at, or maybe things he's not as comfortable at, or we can say, hey, look, let's put him in position to be successful. So people say, well, why are you hard on the defensive coaches than the offensive coaches? Because the defensive coaches didn't do those things. We saw improvement from the offense in a lot of places. We saw Chancey Stuckey get the receivers to play much better fundamental football by the end of the year than they did at the beginning. He had a bunch of freaking sophomores. And you're telling me a bunch of senior linebackers can't make any improvement, and then they start to improve, and then they fall off the cliff again against USC and in the bowl game. So at some point in time, you got to say, this isn't a J.D. Bersham problem. Because I've seen J.D. play better football than this. This isn't a Jack Kaiser problem. Jack is who he is. And there's a role for Jack to be a good – when he was used to attack, I'm going to say it again, Ryan, when he was used to attack, he might have been their best blitzing linebacker. Yeah. But he just wasn't used to do it as much as the other guys.
Right.
Okay, well, fix that. But to your point, if Maris is just running right in the middle, then let Jalen sneak. You can't tell me you can't just line Jalen up and say, hey, JD, tell him which gap to hit.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, you can't be that hard. But when you ask so much from them, and what does that mean? We had a question for the mailbag, and we'll talk about it now from 99 Problems Became One. How complex does defense have to be? Defense is always about attacking and pursuing. Why complicate it? To me, the layers of complexity compensate for a lack of ability. I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's just that in the NFL, there is a level of complexity needed to handle all the complexity of the modern pass game. Back in the day, Ryan, when it was just, running out of 21 personnel, and the NFL was kind of a 2-receiver, 2-back kind of offense. Mm-hmm. It was hey, get really talented players, and there was a level of complexity, but it wasn't like it is today because the game was just on a much more condensed field. And what I mean by that is, there was usually 8-9 guys kind of all right there. The tight end, the 5 linemen, the quarterback, 2 backs, and it was always kind of there, right? And you play the game differently that way. Well, now because there's so much space and there's so much movement and motion and all those type of things, there's a level of you got to be pretty good pre-snap to make sure that, hey, if we're in 2x2 and we're going to have this check and they go to 3x1, we've got to have a check for that. We've got to make sure people bounce. Otherwise, we're just going to out-leverage this all game with motion. So there has to be some level. You can't just make a call, line up, and do it no matter what. That's not really how football works. And if you try that, you're going to get beat a lot by good teams, Especially
at the highest level. I mean, right. I would say this too, Brian, like when you're in the NFL and the parity is so much higher, right? You're playing against teams almost every week that if you have just a C game, you're probably going to lose, right? Like you don't have to have a terrible game to lose a football game in the NFL. I mean, we see it every week where in the regular season where a good team loses to a really bad team. Like it happens all the time. And the reason that happens is because coaching matters so much at the NFL, right? Scheme matters so much.
There you go. Scheme matters. There you go.
Yes. Because it's the separator when teams are on a similar level of talent. Scheme can be the differentiator, right? Like that this game was called better on the offensive side of the football, so they won the football game. They were able to outscore against a defense that is almost equally as talented. In college, what is the reason to overcomplicate a defense against Marshall, for instance, when
right.
As long as you line up and you read your keys correctly and you fly the football, you're more talented than them.
Right.
It's just a higher difference of talents between a Notre Dame and a Marshall. Like that's just point blank period than if the Titans are playing the Texans on a given week, even though the Texans aren't a very good football team, right? The scheme is the biggest separator on the NFL level because everyone's talented. They're all in the NFL for a reason. College football has 130 plus FBS teams and then a lot more FCS teams, right? And then Division II and so on and so forth. There's a lot of teams, a lot more differentiation of talent from one team to the next, especially from a Notre Dame that is here and a Marshall, for instance. But why does a Marshall beat a Notre Dame? Well, Notre Dame didn't play well, but also you overcomplicated your scheme a little bit. Like, why was that your game plan going into this game when you know at the end of the day your Jimmies and Joes are better than their Jimmies and Joes?
Right.
It is. Right. Against Ohio State, that matters, right? Against those teams, that really matters. But against the teams that you shouldn't be losing to, usually it's because your scheme was overcomplicated for some reason.
Right. Well, to back up your example, right? Let's look at the worst teams in the NFL this year. You have the Houston Texans, worst team in the NFL. They beat the Jaguars, and in Jacksonville, a playoff team, right? Chicago Bears, one of the worst teams in the NFL this year. They beat the San Francisco 49ers this year by 9. Right? I mean, that's one of the best teams in the NFL, right? I mean, they just smashed St. Louis or Seattle with their backup quarterback, right? The Indianapolis Colts stunk this year. They were bad this year. They beat 2 playoff teams this year, the Chiefs and the Jaguars, right? Chiefs are pretty good. Notice the Chiefs didn't play this weekend. Why? It's called a bye week because they're really good. And we can kind of go down and do this dance all day, right? But here's the reason, because as you said, in the NFL, the worst team in the NFL on any given Sunday can beat the best team in the NFL. I don't care how many times Vanderbilt and Alabama played this year. If they played each other 12 times, Alabama's going 12-0. I mean, that's not a knock. I don't care how good the coaches are at Vanderbilt right now. Their roster just doesn't compete. Now, that may change in 2-3 years as Clark Lee and his staff build better players and get better players. That may change. But I'm just telling you, this year, they played 12 times. A couple times maybe Vanderbilt plays them close, but Alabama wins every game because the talent differential is so great. But also these are professionals. They can do more at the next level. You're talking about 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old young men that just aren't prepared to handle that type of thing, who have to go to class, who have to do things that you're only allowed X amount of time each week with these kids. It's not the case in the NFL. And so that's the adjustment that Coach Golden needs to make. And the hope is that in year 2, he gets back to being that kind of guy. Because as you said, Ryan, Georgia does not just line up and play on defense. They don't. There's the checks and adjustments and coverage looks and mixing things up and all that. But it's their players executed at a high level. So Georgia's players are a lot faster than Notre Dame's. Well, the combine would say that that's not necessarily true the last few years, right? But what they do is they know where they're going and they fly to the ball.
Yes.
Now, have there been times when Georgia's had guys that are more athletic than Notre Dame's players? Sure. But Notre Dame has had some guys that can flat out run too, right? Like Notre Dame doesn't have anybody on their roster this year, in my opinion, that runs like Roquan Smith. But you know what? Neither did most teams in college football this year. You know what I mean? So that's the whole thing is that there's just a level of, you got to know where you're going and you got to fly to the ball with reckless abandon. You know what I mean? And that's probably not the right way to say it, with just a controlled aggression, because you got to play with proper angles. And that's all stuff that Georgia does. Like, this is where I've said before, people disrespect Georgia by just saying it's about talent, because it's not just about talent. Talent's a big role in it. They have talent. No one's disputing that. But they started like 3 freshmen this year.
Yep. On
defense. Malachi Stark started. They had a linebacker that started, whose name escapes me right now. And then they had the Williams kid at defensive line that started. And at times, Bear Alexander also started this year a little bit for them. They had a lot of young kids that played this year. Those kids were able to just line up and play. Well, yeah, but they're really highly ranked players. So was Jalen Sneed, right? You're going to tell me that the kids at Georgia just run that much better than Jalen Sneed or Nolan Ziegler? I'm sitting here telling you right now, that's not the case. But Kirby said, I got to get my best players in the field. And so if we can't do as much as we did last year, that's cool, because I got to get my best guys in the field. And there were so many times this year with like Isaiah Foskey where you're like, why are they asking? Like, just let him freaking go after the quarterback. Like, you're overthinking this. Just let him go play. Like, to your point about Marshall was a brilliant one, Ryan. Yep. Why are you doing all this stuff schematically? Why are you switching your game plan up in the middle of the week? and going from one thing to another in the middle of a week it's Marshall. Let your kids go play. And then guess what? 3rd and 9, they're backed up inside their own 10. You've got a fourth quarter lead. If you stop it right there, the Notre Dame offense is finally getting some momentum going with its run game. They had finally kind of moved Marshall a little bit on the previous series. 3rd and 9, you make a stop, and a simple motion had Notre Dame's linebackers like, what are we supposed to do? And they turn a freaking fullback or tight end loose for an easy completion on 3rd and 9. If they make that simple slide route stop right there, Notre Dame wins that game. Simple as that. But there was so much going through all of their heads that nobody knew who was supposed to pick up a motion guy. And that's the stuff you talk about and say there's now late in the year, we didn't see quite that many blown assignments, but you go look at the USC game, you're like, why is nobody covering that guy on 3rd and 1? Like, how does nobody know they're supposed to cover that guy? Who is supposed to be a linebacker? So the same guy that blew that coverage in a big moment in the second game of the year is the same guy that blew that coverage in the last game of the regular season. And you're like, but you still keep throwing him out there. Yeah. And that's the frustrating thing. So if that part of it gets better, and this is why I'm also encouraged, Ryan, because if Al Golden's a smart guy, very smart guy. James Laurinaitis is a smart guy. This is his first year really as a coach. He's going to get better. And I've heard some things from players and parents and stuff like that he's learning more and more and more how to communicate with the kids and how to talk to the kids, and there's that relationship is building, and he's going to be fine. Al Golden is a smart guy. Marcus Freeman is a smart guy. It's about whether or not they have the humility to look in the mirror and say the play of the linebackers issue was on me. Right. It's not JD's fault. It's not, hey, let's just go recruit better players. And if you do think that, then play the other players. Mm-hmm. Right? And so, but if the point is they're smart guys that if they're able to have a little bit of humility, which probably is the hardest thing for coaches to have. I'm going to be completely honest. The hardest thing for me as a coach when I was young and was having success was humility. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to find that overly shocking in this chat, right? But it's more of well, I know what I was teaching, and I know what I was teaching was right. It's not my fault they didn't execute it. And then I learned very quickly, yeah, it is. You know what I mean? Like, no, it is your fault. And I've said this before. If Maris was the only guy struggling this year, I'd have been like, look, he just doesn't.
He's the problem. Yeah, right.
But it wasn't just him. He was the most egregious at it because he doesn't have the instincts that Jack and JD have. Like, there were times this year, Ryan, where JD was going in the wrong direction. And he is really athletic. And I don't think people appreciate how athletic he is. He would just plant, redirect, and then go make a play. Like, oh, what a great call. And you're like, no, he was supposed to go here. And then he redirected and went and made a play. And you're like, okay, like that's just that stuff's got to stop, right?
Yeah.
So you're going into year 2. You do have guys that really know the game. If they have some humility and say, hey, look, we're gonna get back to making this better. I'm excited about this group. We've had a lot of negativity here for about 40 minutes, just negative, right? But the point is, I like the talent in the room. And if Marist isn't the player we thought he could be, okay, fine. Play Jalen, play Prince, play Nolan, play Jaden, play Drake. I don't care. Play somebody. If JD can't get the job done, hey, look, then move Junior back to Mike. Play Drake, play Jaden, play Nolan. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, there's no if Jack Kaiser can't cover in space, put Jalen out there, put Nolan out there, put Jaden Osbury out there, put a safety out. The point is, there's way too much talent at this position for this not to be a strength, in my opinion.
Agree.
And so that's why we're focusing so much in this show about the coaching, because there is talent in the room, Ryan. And if the coaches can do their job, which is you take the talent, you teach them how to play, and then you point them in the right direction and say, now go do it, baby. And if they do that, then we're going to be singing a completely different tune about All Golden this year, right? And that's the thing that encourages you, because he is a smart guy. And people keep wanting to bring up Brian Van Gorder. They're not in the same universe. Yeah. Al Golden knows defense. In a lot of ways, there's a lot of soundness to what he does. It's just the players can't execute it. And if I was an NFL coach, I'd like some of the things that Al Golden did this year. I would.
Right.
But the point is this isn't the NFL. Brian Van Gorder didn't know what he was doing. Brian Van Gorder is also an a-hole who didn't know what he was doing, who didn't have his own convictions as a coach, which is why he would go get a playbook from somebody else in the middle of a game to call a blitz. Okay? Al Golden knows the game, and he's a good guy, and he doesn't treat the kids poorly and doesn't talk about really nasty things with them, right? And in a manner to insult them in practice. That's not who he is. So we don't need to be talking about Brian Van Gorder.
Yep.
This isn't that. This defense was much better than anything Brian Van Gorder ever put on the field. What we're saying is it wasn't championship level. That's the difference. This was a top 25 to 30 defense this year. And every defensive metric around, Ryan, like that you can use from an efficiency and, based on who you played standpoint, all that kind of stuff, this was a top 30 defense. Brian Van Gorder never had a top 60 defense. So stop, right? But the point is now it can't be a top 30 defense next year. It's got to be top 15 defense next year. The talent's there at linebacker to get that done. It's just about whether or not you can make the changes you need to make and get the guys on the field that you need to get on the field. Because if you can't get Jalen Sneed and Prince Colley and Nolan Ziegler and maybe even one of the freshmen, Jaden Alsbury, Drake Bowen, in some kind of role next year, then you're the problem.
Yep.
You're the problem. And I'm encouraged, though, Ryan, because I do think these are smart guys. And I do think they're good men, the coaches. They're good guys.
Yep.
If they can have a little humility, I start getting excited again about linebacker play. I really do.
No doubt. And I think there's a lot to be excited about and optimistic about because, like you said, Brian, the one thing about Al Golden is we knew that he hadn't called a defense in a long time, right? We knew that. And I would imagine, just based upon true progression, that he's going to be better in year 2 than he was in year 1.
Yep.
Like, that's pretty basic, right? James Laurinaitis is going to be a better coach in year 2 than he was in year 1. Maybe Marcus Freeman has a little bit more of a hand in the linebacker play. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, right? But all I know is they have the resources, and the resources are not only the strength staff, it's not only the staff of coaches that you have, it's also the simple fact that you have talent in the room, right? Like at the end of the day, you have guys that can play, guys that can run. We were talking about Drake Bowen during the All-American Bowl week. It's like literally, if he's the Mike linebacker for you in the future, you're going to go from 6 foot, 225, 230 pound JD Pertran to 6'2", 235, 240 pound Drake Bowen, right? Like there's an upgrade in talent. Well. Yeah.
Right.
And there's an upgrade in talent that is coming with the last 2 recruiting classes. But at the end of the day, the coaching and development needs to be up to par, or else that development is going to be wasted on the talent that is in the room. There's talent in the room, no excuses.
You don't have length problems in the 2022 and 2023 recruiting classes.
Jalen
Steed's not tall, but he's long.
Mm-hmm.
Nolan Ziegler's both. He's tall and long, right? And so you got to take advantage of that. Jaden Alsbury's not real tall, but he's long. Drake has got good height, but he's long. Preston Zinter is 6'2", 6'2.5", maybe 6. He's actually grown a little bit. He's about 6'3" now and long. Can't use that. That's not an excuse anymore. And they can all run. Yeah. I'm going to say this right now, too. When you look at this current recruiting class, there's years in the past, Notre Dame fans would have been a lot more excited about Preston Zinter as a football player. But because of how much talent they've landed the last 2 years, it's like we never hear about Preston Zinter. That's partly our fault because we determine what gets talked about. We don't talk enough about Preston Zinter. But you don't hear people asking about Preston Zinter either. Why? Exactly. Because of how many big-time players they've landed. But I've talked to sources that say, don't be shocked if he's as good, if not better, than the other 2 guys. That's how good that. And you know who pushed for Preston Zinter? You know who really wanted Preston Zinter on this team? It's Marcus Freeman.
Yep.
He met Preston. So I remember when this happened too, Ryan. You were pretty new. You had just kind of gotten hired here. And he went out and saw Preston Zinter during the winter evaluation period. And he came back and pretty much told the staff, I want that kid. Like, that kid has length, that kid can run, and he's got the kind of personality and attitude that I want. That kid can flat out play here.
And they cooled very quickly after making that decision on guys like Phil Picciotti, who I liked. I thought was a really good player, but Preston Zinter was their guy at the end of the day.
That's a good point, too, because there were some other linebackers on the board that liked Notre Dame a lot that they backed off of. Quickly. backed off of because of him. Jordan Hall's another one, you know, that they liked, but because they were going to get Jaden Osbury and Preston Zinter and guys like that, they were perfectly fine backing off of. So, yes, you were correct. And, I mean, they like him. Now, they could end up being wrong, right. on all these guys. But you look at his film, you're like, this kid can play. And he was at once a top 250 player that just there was no reason to keep ranking him high because there's no clicks that were going to come from it. And he's from Massachusetts. Who cares?
Yes.
But he can play. Yep. So the point is, you know, look, and I watched a full game where Drake Bowen, who's a stud, was on the field with Nolan Ziegler, and Nolan was a senior and Drake was a junior, and there was no question who the best player on the field was that day. And it wasn't even close. It was Nolan Ziegler, who, yep. I mean, he picked off a bubble screen and ran it to the house.
I saw that highlight, yeah.
And also had over 100 yards receiving in that game. You know what I mean? So you've got length, you've got athleticism, you got talent, and you've got veterans. And you've got everything, really, this year. There's no excuse talent-wise. There's no deficiencies on the roster. And honestly, they could afford to lose a guy and still be okay. Whether it's injury or transfer, whatever the case may be, and still be just fine because of that talent. And we're not even talking about, you know, the potential of having like Josh Burnham and Jordan Pataho and Junior Tuihalamaka playing in some 3-3 looks as technically linebackers.
True.
So linebacker can be a strength, and that's what kind of gets me excited, Ryan, is when you really start looking at the talent. Like, boy, if the coaches can make some adjustments, and I'm hopeful they can, and I know they're capable of it, boy, this group has got some guys that can run. And we have seen this in the past. We have seen positions that were problems for Notre Dame one year, and even with the same guys, or maybe just one adjustment, all of a sudden next year come out and it's a strength. I mean, the personnel of the offensive line this year wasn't a whole lot different than what it was last year.
Nope.
It was basically 3 or 4 of the same guys most of the year, right? And so every guy that started a game for Notre Dame on the offensive line this year started a game on the offensive line for Notre Dame the year before. And it was a significantly better group because they made some coaching changes. Now, not all coaching changes require a different person, right? Sometimes it's just, hey, I need you to make some adjustments. We thought we could do this. Now you're in year 2. Hey, we know your guys now better. Here's what you need to do.
Sure.
The only discouraging thing for me is I didn't feel like they did anything different in the bowl game. That was my only discouraging thing. Is like they had a whole month to prepare, and I feel like they kind of did the same stuff in the bowl game.
Yeah.
So that's my only little you know.
And instead of playing some of the younger guys, just sort of like toying them with at different positions and stuff, and
right,
a little frustration.
Yeah, it was. But the talent's there. I really like the talent, the present and the future talent, and that's kind of another part of the show, Ryan. Is we look at the talent that they have coming back, and we've talked a lot about the veterans. One of the big things for me is none of them played well enough to me to where anyone's guaranteed a starting job. I think the guy that right now would be hard to supplant is J.D. Bertrand. If somebody beats him out, great. That's how college football is supposed to be. But part of the reason that I really feel like it's important for Al Golden to make the necessary changes is because I think one of the things that hurt J.D. this year is because he did have to worry so much about what everybody else was doing.
Right.
And because I think Marist had so many struggles, you could see him communicating to him a lot in games, like trying to get him lined up and stuff. If they can get the product around him better and maybe take a little bit off his plate, the Mike's always got to communicate and get everybody lined up, but maybe take a little off his plate. I think JD is going to be a really impactful player for Notre Dame next year. And he was a much better player this year than fans give him credit for. I think he might be, I have to think about this, but he might be the guy that I think gets the least respect for what he does and gets the most, like, for whatever reason, fans just kind of beat up on him and he stinks, he shouldn't play. And I'm like, I don't know what you're watching or what I'm missing, because outside of a couple games, I thought J.D. Bertrand was a really good football player. He just made those really noticeable mistakes that people would grab onto.
Yeah.
And Marist would make those too, but the difference is everything in between with J.D. was really good. That wasn't true for Marist. And I think that's what some people miss about J.D. But now it's up to the coaches to say, hey, put him in position where he's not making those mistakes. You know, where he's getting to the football sooner and those type of things. And I think you'll see a much better football player this year at Mike linebacker.
I mean, yeah, because you've seen it, right? Like you've seen him play good football, even back to 2021. Like there were games where you're just like, that's the Mike linebacker next year, right? Like if he makes that move, that's a starting inside linebacker. And I agree. I think that he played a lot better, especially down the stretch, than people are going to give him credit for. I think the second half of the year, especially, I think he played good football. I mean, there were a couple rough games early, there's no doubt. But to the point of the beginning of this show, if there's you want to see development throughout the season, right? If a guy just stays stagnant and just isn't very consistent or good the entirety of the year, then I mean, it almost becomes a little bit of a lost cause, right? But if a guy shows development and shows maturation, that's what you're looking for. And folks, I'm not like, this isn't smoke, right? Like coming into the year, there was an NFL draft service that had a draftable grade on JD Bertrand. Like he's a good football player, man. It's just you need to accentuate his strengths is the biggest.
He looks like Joe Schmidt. That's what Notre Dame fans stick to.
He does look like
he physically looks like Joe Schmidt. He's the same height, and so people just assume. And here's the other thing: JD wanted to be at Notre Dame so bad he was willing to be a walk-on at first.
It's wild.
Yeah. Now he wasn't your traditional walk-on. He wasn't like Matt Salerno. It's just they wanted him. They didn't have enough room. Marist had agreed to the same thing to a degree. And then they ended up both getting scholarships, but he was going to be a scholarship guy as soon as one came available. So it's not your typical thing. And so I think a lot of people hold that against him, and there's just these assumptions. Oh, he's a short. I mean, we already had some clown in the show earlier saying, oh, get the white linebackers off the field. They can't run. You're an idiot. Like, first of all, them being white has nothing to do with it, right? But second of all, they can all run.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing I say, that the laziness about it. Now, does JD need to be more clean? Does he need to be a better tackler? Yes. But people act like he's this horrible tackler. Pro Football Focus had him down for 10 missed tackles this year. That's it. I'd probably give a couple more than that. But the point is the stigma has been created.
Yep.
And now all you remember from a game is the one missed tackle.
No doubt.
And all you remember from a game is the time he hit the wrong hole. He had a bad run fit. And you ignore all the other. It's like Troy Pride was that way. Notre Dame fans would just always remember the one completion he gave up and not even realize he locked dudes down the entire rest of the game. I don't know why they do that. I've never understood that. But that's what JD is. He does not get the respect that he to me deserves. And but he's got to play better, though. That's the thing, though. He was a good football player this year for the most part. He needs to be better because he needs to be a really good football player next year. And being a really good football player means as a Mike linebacker means you have to be the most assignment correct dude on the field. And that's where JD's got to get to, in my opinion, next season.
If you're going to scream about getting the white linebackers off the field, you're probably the same person that was upset that they didn't get Luke Kuechly back in the day.
Or wasn't
right?
upset. Wasn't upset that they didn't get Luke Kuechly.
God. It's just so inconsistent, man.
Back to the point.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. That's consistency's the thing for me.
Yeah, no doubt.
He's got to be more consistent. He's
a good football player. He should not be run off. It's just like you mentioned Zeke Corral earlier, right? You remember there were some people in this chat that wanted to run off Audric Estime after he had a couple fumbles, right? And understandably, again, something that he had to clean up, something he had to get better on. But at the end of the day, he is still be a valuable member of what you do as a football team.
That's the thing that drives me nuts. He got better.
Yeah.
It's like once a guy struggles, he sucks, bench him, never play him again. Like that, you can't be that way.
And in comparison, like I understand more the frustration with Marist because Marist was pretty not great the entire year, right? Like he didn't really show progress. JD did show progress. He got better. And that's what you want. If a guy has a struggle, you want him to get through it and then get better. And I think JD Bertrand did that this year.
And there's times too where he's the guy by the ball on a big play that people think, well, he missed it. No. It's like the long seam pass. I've had people say like the one where they put the receiver at Wildcat and they threw that pass.
Yeah.
And JD's coming over and he's the guy that looks like he got beat up the seam. No, he wasn't. There was a linebacker there that should have run with the tight end, but JD, it's like that play you pointed out in the bowl game with Drake Bowen.
Yeah.
Where it looks like Drake got beat on the play, but that wasn't his guy. He was recovering, trying to make up for somebody else who made a mistake.
Yes.
But when fans just see, well, he was there, and we'll do this sometimes too, like because you got to make an assumption. Okay, this is what happened, and here's a mistake. So like there was a play in the Cotton Bowl where Alohi Gilman got beat up the seam for a big play. And I'm like, Alohi got beat. Well, then talking to a couple of people after the game, like, no, actually, he was in the right position. The corner was supposed to squeeze over top of that, and he never did. And that's what happened on that play. So you got to understand, kind of, just because a guy might have been the closest dude to the ball doesn't mean he was the one that made that mistake.
Right.
It just means he recognized that there was a mistake made, and he hustled over there and wasn't able to make the play. But JD also will make some mistakes. He's just got to play cleaner football. And part of that, to me, is again, what he was asked to do. There was too much put on his plate. And not just because he can't handle it, because I don't think anybody could handle it. Now, he'll be able to handle it better in year 2 because he'll be in the system longer. But if you can combine him knowing the system more with just taking – and again, we're not talking about wiping the playbook out, Ryan. We're talking about maybe taking off like 10% of what you're doing right now. That's it. This isn't like this dramatic overall. Just look, we'll need quite as many checks, right? You're making 8 checks. Let's do 5. You know what I mean? You've got 9 different coverages. Let's do 6. Right? Like, it's stuff like that. It's not like play cover 1 and do this every snap and you're going to be great. Yeah, you're going to beat Tennessee State that way. But you're going to get killed by Ohio State doing it that way. Right? You're going to get killed by USC doing it that way. So that's really what we're talking about. But, JD can play. To me, with Jack Kaiser, he's an interesting one. They've got to do a better job with him of finding a niche for him. Because I just feel like he's got the body of a rover to a degree without the length, but he doesn't have the game of a rover, in my opinion. He plays more like an inside linebacker, to be completely honest with you. So part of me wonders if they do go to a 3-3-5, and this is just our projection, our conversation, just having a conversation, I kind of wonder, are you better off having him as the Sam and having Drake as the Mike? I mean, not Drake, JD as the Mike. And then obviously your Viper's that weak side guy that would then stack backside. So technically he'd be the Will, but not a traditional Will. So I kind of wonder, because now you're having Jack covering running backs and running seams with tight ends where he's got safety help. Now all of a sudden you've put Jack in a much better position to where his game is better suited. And then you rotate reps with other guys. So that way you can limit him being exposed to some of those areas where he's not as good. If you're dead set on starting him is what I'm talking about. Yep. Is my point. But even as part of a rotation, I think he's better suited as part of a rotation there than he is playing out in space. Okay. That's where he's been most effective this past year, in my opinion, Ryan.
Yep. Well, that's why I'm interested to see what the Viper position looks like just moving forward for Notre Dame, right? Because I feel like we're kind of stuck in that. It's a linebacker, right? A de facto linebacker, but does that rover evolve into more of a safety hybrid, a guy that can kind of do?
I think that's why you recruit Thomas Harper. Because let's think about this, Ryan. We did the schedule breakdown yesterday. Yep. So I want to cut you off because I don't want you to move on to something else. I want to focus on that right there, because part of what your decision on that is going to be, who do you play?
Yep.
If you're a coach like, hey, I believe in being a 4-2-5 with 5 true DBs on the field, but you look at your schedule and you're like, okay, well, who do you play? Okay, we're playing 2011 Stanford. We're playing 2019 Wisconsin. We're playing, you know what I mean? Like, okay, you're playing a bunch of 11 or 21, 12 personnel teams running football. You'd be an idiot to go to that alignment, right? And so that's one of the things I liked about what Marcus Freeman did in the Peach Bowl a couple of years ago against Georgia is when Georgia would sub 12 personnel, he subbed 4-3 personnel almost every time. It was just like, okay, because I understand what we need to do to compete against that personnel group. But when you look at the schedule this year and you look at, you start off with Navy, it's a different animal. Central, NC State, the way that they're going to play this year with Robert and I, that's a nickel-based defense game.
Yep.
Ohio State, for the most part, is a nickel-based defense game where your safeties have to be really good against the run because they are a balanced team usually. You then go to Duke. That is a nickel game. Louisville, nickel game. USC, nickel game. Clemson, nickel game. Stanford, nickel game. I mean, almost every good team you play this year, except for Pitt, in my opinion, is a team where your base defense, you're going to be better off being in a nickel, which is a big reason they went and got Thomas Harper. So I do think whether you're a 4-2-5 or a 3-3-5, I do think we're going to see more 2 linebacker alignments this year. I think that is something we're going to see, which is why, in my opinion, it wouldn't be bad to find a different role for Maris Luafau. Have him be Bo Bauer on third down. That's what Maris needs to do.
I'd be fine with it. Yeah.
Because it's like, hey, dude, you're just blitzing. You got one job. You're just blitzing. Now, I'm not saying I would necessarily start him there. I mean, I think there some other guys might be able to do that job a little bit better. But to me, I mean, those are the things you look at, Ryan, and say, hey, you've got to be able to adjust to who you're playing. And who you're playing is, I don't know how much value having a 4-2-5 out of 4-3 personnel defense does for you this season. I mean, you tell me who the teams on the schedule are that's your best personnel group in their base offense. Navy,
Pittsburgh.
Pitt.
Yeah.
I mean, Wake's not that team. Wake's a nickel team. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know enough about Tennessee State, but honestly, it shouldn't matter that game. Central Michigan's a base defense team, but are you really building your defense around what you need to do to line up and beat up Central Michigan and Pitt? I don't think so. So,
especially because they're I think their running back entered the draft anyway, right? That Lou Nichols kid. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong about that, but
you're talking about the kid at Central Michigan?
Central Michigan, yeah. The kid that led college football in Russian like 2 years ago or whatever. So, I mean, whether you look at it, man, I think that it makes, I don't know. I just think if that is the evolution of the defense, I think that strengthens multiple positions in the defense, because I think the rover position right now is getting a little lost with how you're playing it comparative to how the game is evolving on the college level, right? With so much more spread and space and just the manufacturing of space. There's just so much more that is put on a rover's plate to be more of a nickel, be more of a safety, to be that guy that can legitimately play some man coverage, play against screens consistently, be able to get in and out of his pedal, to just redirect in space. All that stuff is just putting on a guy's plate so much more that it's not necessarily that Jack Kaiser can't be a successful football player in the right role. It's that he may not be the prototype for that position anymore.
He can't play that position. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Because that's just how the game's moving, man. And that happens to a bunch of different players. It's no push against Jack at all. It's a matter of fact of, like, in the NFL and college football and high school football, the game evolves, right? And players become different. Like some big ends that there used to be playing in the NFL, for instance, some like 300-pound guys that used to have on the edge, they're D tackles now. And that's not a bad thing. That's just how the game has evolved over time. It's like Reggie White in today's game. He played mostly on the edge, but Reggie White today might be a dominant 5-tech and 3-tech in the system today. Doesn't make him less valuable. It doesn't make him less of a great football player. Just makes the game different than what it was.
And that's where they have to evolve. I mean, there are linebackers. If they are dead set on being a 3-linebacker team, there are linebackers that can play that role. But Jack's not it. And that's not a knock on Jack. That's this thing, hey, put him in position where he can be good. Because as I've said before, if you go back and look at some of the games this year, Jack Kaiser was a really good football player at times. He was really good against South Carolina. But what were they using him to do? Come off the edge, stuff inside, run blitz. They weren't putting him in space a ton, and he wasn't as good when he was in those situations, right? I mean, and those are the things you do. Like, that's where Jack has to play. Is closer to the ball. That's just where he's most comfortable. He was really good against Navy. Really good against BYU. And so you just look at some of these different things and say, boy, that guy's a better player when you use him inside as a rotation guy, not a full-time player. And I think those are going to be the keys. And you've got to be able to find if you feel like you find a team that says, hey, this team's a spread team, but they like to run the ball, USC, Ohio State, then you're going to have to find your Jalen Sneed, your Nolan Ziegler, your guys like that. And Nolan Ziegler's up over 230 pounds now. I think you've beefed him up past the point where he can play rover now. I don't think you can play him there now. So now it comes down to Jalen Sneed and Jaden Ausberry, if you're going to have that guy. And if not, then you need to go to more of a true 5 DB look with a safety type there, which is what Thomas Harper is.
At least do it more, if nothing else, right? Like, I mean, I just feel like, to your point, Brian, like, you're just sticking to that 4-3 personnel just almost exclusively most of the time, right? And it's just like, at some point, you need to understand that things are changing a little bit. So we can still do our 4-3 stuff in spurts, but also we need to have that nickel ready to go, right? Like it needs to be in the playbook and it needs to be more of a rotation because at the end of the day, the game is becoming more sub than base at this point. Or I should say that the sub is becoming the base, right? Like that is happening and we need to evolve or else you get left behind.
Right. Like for me, when I watched the USC game again, and I watched Jack Kaiser, who played 19 snaps, and I look at Maris Luafau, who played 64 snaps, and I'm asking myself, why?
Did you play 64 snaps in that game? Wow.
Yeah. Why? Why put him there when he doesn't? You're asking why not put Jack where they had Marist? I mean, you know what I mean. Like, so it's just there was a little bit of a stubbornness there, to be honest with you, that I'm hoping comes out. It's hard to change your stripes in the middle of the season. It is, and so that's why you have hope that's why I had hope that they would maybe make some adjustments in the bowl game, and they really didn't. And then you kind of have some hope that, they played Jalen Sneed some more, and that's fine. That's great. He needs to play more. He's too talented not to play. But you didn't see anything from Nolan Ziegler. You didn't see anything from Josh Burnham. Burnham's someone to understand. And look, you went out and they moved the ball on you pretty well. Second half, I thought the defense played a lot better.
Agree.
And shut South Carolina down. So, I mean, there's hope there. There's optimism there. But this defense was good last year. It was. It was good last year. But if it's going to get to the point where it's really good, which is where it needs to be, linebacker play has to be better, in my opinion. And I think it can be because there's a lot of talent there. And look, and it's not to me, I don't want them relying on Drake Bowen and Jaden Ausberry and Preston Zinter as rookies. I want to see, I'll say this. If Nolan Ziegler, Jalen Sneed, and Prince Colley don't get legitimate opportunities to push for starting jobs this spring, then I'm gonna not be a pleasant person when talking about the defensive staff in this offseason. I'm just telling you that right now, because there's the only reason that that's true is because they're just too young to handle my defense, and that's coaching, not players. So I'm very curious to see. Now, do I expect all of them to step in the lineup and start? I do not, but they better play. And at least there needs to be at least one starting change in there. And I don't know if it's Prince Colley. I don't know if that's necessarily the given, because I think Prince Colley is a good football player. But what Prince has to show me this offseason, Ryan, is that he's not just an athlete. He's got to show me his instincts for the position. That's still something I'm not quite certain of. Same thing with Jalen Sneed. Jalen has instincts, but Jalen has to still learn the finer points of playing linebacker because he never really played it in high school. He was a quarterback and a running back and a defensive end and a
he played on ball a lot.
Everywhere. He lined up with his hand in the ground as a junior, playing off the edge. Crazy. And because that's where his coach needed to play him. I mean, there was such a big gap between him and everybody else on that team that he needed to put him there wherever he could have the biggest impact. And so Jalen's still learning those things. And this is a big offseason for him. Like, hey, teach him how to play the game. Nolan Ziegler is way too long and way too athletic and way too instinctive of a football player, Ryan, to not be a guy that isn't in the mix next year. Sure. I mean, forget next year, in March and April.
Yep.
Right? And I would say the same thing with Prince. They'll have a lot to prove, but they've got ability. And they've got to figure out a way to get them on there. Because you also run the risk of what if Jalen Sneed and and Prince Colley are your two best linebackers? You're not real. Can you handle teams that want to run the football? Because Prince Colley's listed at 220, I think. He's not 220.
Yeah.
He's like 210, 215 at most. Jalen's 215. Jalen's actually putting on good weight. Like he's bulked up. But I mean, maybe he's your Mike at some point in time down the road, depending on what you want to do. So it's just about get your young guys opportunities to go play, because there's a lot of talent there, man. I do want to talk about Jalen Sneed for a second, Ryan, because this is an interesting conversation. This is the big name. I want to talk about the two sophomores that we were just talking about real quick. Mm-hmm. When I look at Jalen Sneed, I want to ask you first and foremost, Ryan, where do you want to see him getting the most playing time in the spring? And what role do you think he can thrive in? Because the God-given tools that kid has are outstanding. It's just about, you got to find the right way to use him.
Sure.
And I don't know if the way that Al Golden used the linebackers last year, there's some things he does that I think Jaden will fit really well, but I feel like they have to maybe adjust a little bit in order to fit the players that they're going to have or should have next year.
Yeah, I mean, with the thought that maybe if Notre Dame is going to really, if they're really going to test the waters of more of a 3-3-5 look, and maybe that rover position becomes a little more of a nickel-centric position, I really think that, I mean, for me, the first thought is Will Linebacker with the explosiveness that he has, right? Playing in pursuit, like those things kind of jump off the page. But honestly, he would be a little bit of a, this might sound weird to some people, but he would be a little interchangeable to me as far as if I'm in a 3-3 stack, I would play him at will. But there would also be some moments in certain situations where I would play him as that Viper type, right? Where I can get him on the ball and coming off the edge a little bit at times. Is it going to be a full-time thing?
Especially on third down.
Absolutely. Yeah. Is it going to be a full-time thing? Absolutely not. It's not going to be because he's just not quite the body type that I need to be there consistently. Like that's more of a Joshua Burnham.
He's not taking off the run. He's not taking off. He's not setting the edge for 30 snaps a game as a Viper. He doesn't have the body to do that.
I'm not forcing Jalen Snead to play off contact on the front side of runs a ton, right? Like he has the length to take on contact, but he just isn't that type of player. He needs to play in pursuit. So if we're talking about a 3-3 alignment or even a 4-2-5 alignment, if we're playing more base nickel, I'm talking Will Linebacker at times, right? And if you're running more 4-3 personnel, then I'm going to get him off the edge a little bit and be able to work him in space. Just let him attack, man. At the end of the day, Will Linebackers to me are guys that can make up for mistakes on the front side of runs with their ability to work in pursuits and can make plays and make guys right or make guys not wrong, I should say, technically, right? So he's a Will Linebacker to me that can do a little bit of stuff in space. So I would like to move him around a ton, but I think base-wise, he's a Will backer with his ability to work in pursuit.
Let's say they go to a 3-3-5.
Yep.
Where do you play him now?
He's still the Will for me in that 3-3-5.
What's a Will in a 3-3-5 for you?
So it's opposite of the Viper. So the outside linebacker, linebacker technically. So he's still technically.
I view that as a Sam for me because he's a strong side guy at that point in time. Basically, he's a field guy, right?
Yeah.
So now in a 4-2, when they bring that guy down, so he's got to be somewhat of a versatile outside linebacker. He's got to play Will when they go to a 4-2. But I think he's got to be able to play some Sam. And I think that's a position. The reason I bring that up is because whatever you call it, Will, Sam, we're talking about the same thing.
Sure. Yep.
That's a position where I can see Jalen being really good.
100%.
Because now he's blitzing opposite the Viper. And it's also, when we actually saw Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah in that role at times in 2020.
Yep.
Like against North Carolina, there were times where Jeremiah was tucked inside. And I was just like, I remember that and blitzing off the edge and blitzing through the B gap. I mean, he had one blitz up the middle in that game where he just exploded through the hole. And that's to me the best comp you can find for Jalen. Jalen is a bigger version of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah physically. Yeah. Now, does he have the game to play in space? I don't know. But if I'm going to play in a 4-2-5 with a 4-3 personnel, you have to put him at rover, in my opinion. You have to, because he's the only guy that can really do it now, in my opinion. I mean, who else on the team can you really say can handle that role and all the – because you mentioned there's a lot that goes into that role. Jack can handle some things about it.
Sure.
You know, Nolan's – I think they've beefed him up beyond him being a rover at this point in time.
Maybe Osbury.
But now you're throwing a true freshman out there to play that role against Ohio State and USC. I mean, and he's still kind of raw technically.
Yep.
So to me – do you find it depends, but that you got to figure out who you want to be this year as your base, and then figure it out. Because if you're going to be a 3-3-5, then Jalen to me is an inside guy that could then bump out to rover at times when you want to go, because you can still go 3-3 out of 3-4 personnel basically. I mean, that's the reality of it.
You know what the fun thing is about the 3-3 with Jalen in it, and I know people are going to be like that's sacrilegious or whatever because everyone hates the 3-3 for other reasons, right? But we talked a lot about when we were talking about safeties, I think last week, Brian, or the week before, I can't remember, about making that safety position a little more interchangeable, right? To kind of rotate and play a little more too high and be able to rotate to both sides, to boundary or to the field. I think if you're running a 3-3 with Jalen Snead's skill set, if he is the player opposite the Viper, let's say it's Joshua Burnham, for instance, right? Both those guys, I can get down on the line of scrimmage and blitz off the edge. I can do both those things. So it's a little more
you can do that with Jordan Botelho as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Because he's played inside linebacker. He's played rover. He's done those
exactly.
things. Yeah.
Exactly.
So having a little more of that interchangeableness, not in the sense that, like, I'm not going to take the Viper and then play him at that other spot.
No,
but in the sense of how you can rotate it.
Right. But it's also, too, Ryan, is you blitz the rover off the edge. You roll the field safety down. You roll the boundary safety over top. You roll the cornerback, and then you drop the rover or the Viper into a curl zone, right? Well, Jordan Patelho and Josh Burnham and Junior Tuihalamaka are going to be able to handle that part of the job a lot better than Isaiah Foskey. I think I've said this before. The one thing I'm going to give Al Golden a lot of credit for this year is they said, this is what Isaiah Foskey can do. We're not going to ask him. I mean, there was times he would, run with a wheel route against the running back, but that's a little different animal. They weren't asking him to line up in a stacked position like they did at times the year before. He was a Viper. He was a 4-down defensive end, stand-up defensive end that would occasionally run with a running back wheel route. That's in NFL, right? Totally fine with that. That's not your personnel this year. And that's why I'm thinking that they're going to be a lot more multiple from a personnel standpoint. Now, that's the other thing I would like to see too, Ryan, is you can simplify your scheme a little bit, but get to it a lot of different ways. And I think there's merit to that as well, because you do have so many different type of linebackers. Well, we're going to do this week, or we're going to kind of have this role, and we're going to do this and use this personnel that way. I think that's something that needs to be thought through as well.
And you can keep more players happy too, right, with that designation. If they know that, hey, I might not be the starter every single week, but against this team, I have my opportunity to shine and then to get my reps, right? So I think that it also makes more people happy as well.
Agree. So Jalen Snead's the guy they need to find a role for, and I'm going to predict it right now. If they truly open up the competition in the spring, truly open it up and let guys battle, don't be shocked if Nolan Ziegler is the guy that emerges at one of those inside spots, not Prince Collie.
Yeah.
Don't be surprised. Look, here's the thing about Prince Collie. He's a very athletic player, but he's 210 pounds, 215 pounds at the most, and he's not a super instinctive player. At least he hasn't been yet. This is a big spring for Prince. Yes. Big spring for Prince, because he's got to show that you're not just an athlete, you're a football player now. Because he was another guy. A lot of
guys coming behind you.
Right.
A lot of guys.
He was another guy that it's not necessarily his fault. He was like Jalen was used he was a 1,000-yard running back as a senior. He was almost a 2,000-yard running back as a senior. He was a 1,000-yard receiver as a junior. Played off the edge, played some safety. He wasn't a guy that not allowed to, because it's not his high school coach's fault. They had to do whatever they could do to use him to make plays in high school. That's what they were doing. But he's still very new to the linebacker position, and he didn't make necessarily the growth this year. And then he's had some trouble at times staying on the field, and being there, answering the bell every time. This is a big spring for him, Ryan, because if he doesn't take a step forward, not only is he not going to push for a starting job, he's going to get passed up.
Exactly.
And the thing about Nolan Ziegler is, from what I see, he runs every bit as well as Prince Collie, but he does it in about 2 to 3 inches taller and about 20 pounds heavier. And that's why I think he's a guy that I think people aren't talking enough about, because he wasn't a highly ranked recruit, that could make a big splash. Him and Jalen Snead could be the guys that end up making the biggest splash this year when it comes to pushing the veterans, in my opinion. I could definitely see that being the case.
Can I ask you, with Nolan gaining so much weight, I know you said he's over like 230 pounds now. Do you think he could be a Mike down the line, or is he a Will? Yeah, okay.
I think he can play Mike. Gotcha. In a modern offense, yes. Gotcha. Is he a Mike in the same way Manti Te'o was? No.
Sure.
No. Is he a Mike in the way that, you see from like how, Georgia doesn't have that big thumper at Mike anymore, right? They don't have that guy anymore. Is he could he be a Mike in the more modern sense of a guy that can just fly downhill, but also strong enough to take on some blocks? In time, he'd have to be more of a niche Mike in 2023, just because he would need a little bit more strength. But man, that kid can blitz. That kid can fly downhill. That kid can run. And yeah, I mean, I think he is very much a ideal modern linebacker, because not only can he run, and we talked this summer about how much he impressed the coaches. He was always finishing first in the sprints and all that other kind of stuff.
Yep.
But he does it in such a long package. I mean, he's at least 6'3". He's over 230 now. He's got long arms, and he can flat out fly. He's a really good lacrosse player, got great feet. We've said this before. That kid had a really high ceiling. It's just about getting him used to it. He's another guy that had to learn how to play one position. He played a bunch of different things in high school. And that's great for them down the road, but it doesn't necessarily lead to them being the most ready to play as true freshmen type of situations. And so that's why I said we weren't beating down the bush for those guys to be starters this year, but there should have been a role for Jalen. I'm fine with Nolan Ziegler redshirting this year. I'm fine with it. I think he's a guy that needs to be a 5-year guy, potentially. Jalen's not going to be here for 5 years. So why even waste time redshirting him? It made no sense to me. But now you're in a different situation, and now those guys need to get a chance to compete. But they can run like Prince, but they're both bigger than he is. That's the reality of it, and that's why I think Prince is going to have a great spring if he's going to want to hang on. He really is. Yeah. And then we haven't even talked about Drake Bowen and Jaden Osborne and Preston Zinter as far as that battle this spring, because they're all on campus.
Yes, they are.
And that's the thing. That's going to be great about the spring is if J.D. Bertrand and Maris Luafau and Jack Kaiser are your starting linebackers next year because in a real competition, they just were better than those young guys, great. They're going to be better this year then. But if they're the starters because they can handle the volume of scheme that you in checks and adjustments that you're putting on the linebackers, that's a problem.
Failure. Yeah.
Ryan, that's a great way of saying it. It's a failure. It's a failure from a coaching standpoint. 100%.
Yep.
100%. You've got to find that balance. And if they can strike it, I think linebackers gonna be effective, right? And so that's where I'm very curious to see. Curious to see if they're able to make the adjustments.
I just don't think there could be a day off for linebackers this spring coming up, man. Like this winter too. Like every day, those kids need to be pushed and they need to understand. Like JD, you've been starting for a couple years now, man. You've done a good job, but like you need to play well or else you're not going to start, right? Like you need to be. Everyone needs to be on notice, and it's not disrespect. It's not because they did anything wrong from a personal perspective. It's just simply for Notre Dame to be at the level that they need to get to. Competition needs to be the main thing. And Marcus Freeman has consistently stressed competition, right? Best man will play, will make the other player better, all those types of things. And I believe in those things too, but you can't preach that if you don't practice it.
100%. It can't just be this, Ryan. And I know I'm using our hand signal for you're muted for this, but it can't just be talk. You can't just say it's about competition and then not actually have a competition.
100%.
Right? Like you can't say, hey, we're all about competition and then just hand Sam Hartman the starting quarterback job. He's got to earn it. If he wants to earn the respect of his teammates, he's got to earn that job. And it goes everywhere. If Blake Fisher, I'm going to use him as an example because this is not how Blake is. But let's just say Blake Fisher goes against who he is and he just comes in like, hey, I had a good year last year. I'm starter and I'm just going to kind of go through the motions. Guess what? He may get beat out, right? Now, I don't expect that. But what helps eliminate that odds? Tosh Baker coming out and having a great spring.
Exactly.
Right. And then Blake's like, okay, I better bring it today. Now, I'm using Blake as an example because I've always praised him for how hard he works. And I don't think that's going to be an issue. But there's the other side of it. What if Blake is working his butt off and Tosh is still pushing him? That's going to make Blake an even better player.
It's going to make
Tosh
even more
locked-in player. Tosh a better player too. Competition is good.
Yep.
And you don't want guys, even competitive guys, feeling like you've got it made. They need to know that they've got to put in the work, and that's true for J.D. Bertrand. That's true for Cam Hart. That's true for Benjamin Morrison. If Benjamin Morrison can't just be like, I got this one down. I'm going to go through the motions in the spring. Hey, Christian Gray's doesn't give a crap that you were an All-American last year. Chance Tucker doesn't give a rip that you were an All-American last year. Doesn't care. Ryan Barnes doesn't care. Clarence Lewis doesn't care. You've got to earn that. That's in the past. Are you going to be a sophomore All-American now? Or are you going to see a sophomore slump? And that was kind of the thing that hurt Notre Dame at receiver this year is you say, well, man, Lorenzo Styles had a sophomore slump. They shouldn't have played him. Who else are you going to play?
Right.
They didn't injure a tight end. They had no depth at receiver. Then there's some injuries at receiver. It's like, who else are you going to play? Well, that's not an issue this year at linebacker.
Nope.
Not even close to being an issue this year at linebacker.
Or wide receiver.
Or wide receiver. Right. But linebackers, linebackers work. There's no excuse just to play guys because they're veterans.
Right.
You play guys because they give you the best chance to win football games. But if that's true because of the complexity of your system, then again, that's a coaching problem, not a player problem. And that's what I want to see. So I think, Ryan, that's going to do it for the linebacker portion of the show. We went a little bit of a different angle here today. We didn't talk as much about the players, more about the coaching, because honestly, at the end of the day, Ryan and I both believe that that's the thing that held the linebacker position back was coaching. And I'm confident it's going to change next year. I am. Let me rephrase. I'm confident it can change. Now we need to see it because coaches are like players. You got to show me. You got to show me. And if they do, I think we're going to have a lot of fun watching this linebacker position. We're going to have a lot more fun watching it next year than we did this year, especially you because you're a linebacker guy. So that'll make it a lot more fun. So that's going to do it for this portion of the show. We're going to have a mailbag coming up next. So get those mailbag questions in. Before we do that, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Also, thanks to all of you, we are now monetized on CFB Nation. So we're going to have, Ryan, you want to go ahead and announce it? Can we talk about it now?
Yeah,
so
man.
One of the new shows we're going to launch on CFB Nation is Ryan is going to start doing a weekly draft show that is going to be on CFB Nation, and it's going to start probably in the next couple weeks. We're not quite sure when it's going to launch. The first shows will be recorded as we kind of get it rocking and rolling, but eventually as we get into the summer, we'll start having we'll get closer to the draft, and then closer to the summer, we'll have some live shows and we'll do those different things. And so we're going to start doing some more things on CFB Nation on top of what we're already doing here. So we thank you all for that, but I'm looking forward to doing more stuff on that. I just recorded a show today with John Garcia Jr. on the state of recruiting, where we talked about the latest with Cormani McClain, Deuce Robinson, and Nicholas Harbor. And then he talked about Jaden Rashada when I left because I had to come here and do this show. And so lot going on there. The CFB All-America guys had a great show yesterday that I'll get up here. Actually, it's on the podcast app, but I'll get it on YouTube here in a little bit later today as well. So definitely check out all of those. And of course, Ryan, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So let's jump into the mailbag, Ryan. And it's not going to be a super long mailbag today, but we're going to get to some. So first of all, I wanted to begin with Kevin Horton. Kevin, thank you very, very much for your super chat. I always love super chats in the off season because we don't get as many. So we always love and appreciate super chats, but we especially love and appreciate them in the off season. ICURN with Irish Luck says, not saying Al Golden is Brian Van Gorder, but it would seem bringing in NFL defensive coaches to be our DC, it doesn't end up well. And the defense is too complicated for players to play fast. And that's with Indy students. I mean, let me say this. Sure. Georgia also brought in an NFL coach to run their offense.
Right.
And it worked out pretty well. We've seen college teams bring in NFL guys and it works. And we've seen them bring in NFL guys and it doesn't work. It's not so much the NFL guy part that doesn't work. It's, can you make the adjustment to say, hey, it's not always about your scheme. It's about the kids. And then you get to like Todd Monken, what he's doing now isn't what he did his first year at Georgia. He built to this.
Yes.
At first, it was like very basic. Get the fundamentals down, know how to block, know how to catch, know how to run, know your proper technique. And then eventually became a lot more creative as the guys really understood the basics of what they were doing. So I don't think I get where you're coming from, but I feel like just because Van Gorder was what he was doesn't make it an NFL problem. That was a Brian Van Gorder problem. Right now, without Golden, right? I think we talked about there is he was doing too much in my view. But he wasn't doing nearly as much as they did in the NFL.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of like, okay, there's obviously an adjustment period for him. And that's kind of what we talk about is it's not so much the NFL part. It's about, can you make the changes? And I think that's something we saw sort of after the Stanford game was we did see the defense scale down a bit. And I think a lot of it had to do with sort of Marcus Freeman coming in after the loss of Stanford and saying, no, this isn't happening anymore. But then, of course, USC game, it went back to, what it was before. And that's why we saw the defense take a step back because there was pretty good linebacker play after the Stanford game for the most part. JD was pretty good. Jack had some good moments. And Marist even had a couple really good games after Stanford. And then we don't think about that as much, Ryan, because we remember, recency bias. And the last two times we saw the linebackers play was against South Carolina and USC, and it wasn't very good.
Yeah.
And that's fair. So I don't think it's so much an NFL thing. It's just about those coaches have to understand that there's an adjustment. So there's always going to be that first year adjustment, but how quickly do you learn from it? And I think that's going to be the big key and the big test for this year.
I also think that profiling like that a little bit kind of makes, just kind of the takes lazy at times. I'm not saying this to ICU at all. I'm just saying that
because I understand where he's coming from.
Yes, I understand where he's coming from. But my point is that just to say all NFL guys can't be successful is nearsighted in my opinion, right? Because it's like the same people in the NFL draft space that say there could never be a good Ohio State quarterback. Really? Never? Like never? Right. There's never going to be one that's good in the NFL. I think that's because not every person's the same. Not every player's the same. Not
imagine if the Bengals said, "Well, Jamarcus Russell was a bust, so we're not going to draft Joe Burrow."
Exactly. Yeah. Not everybody's the same. Not everything is the same situation. There have been NFL coaches that can come in and run a really good defense in college football. There have been on the offensive side of football. It is possible. Brian Van Gorder, I think, is a harsh reality that sometimes guys get a reputation based upon who they work with and not actually what they know, right? Like that was the thing with Brian Van Gorder. He was under Rex Ryan, who's a very smart defensive guy, and people assumed that Brian Van Gorder is also a very smart defensive guy, and that's not always how that works. That's why I always push back so much in the NFL when they hire sometimes, Brian, I feel like they hire these offensive coordinators who were offensive coordinators under offensive head coaches that called the game. And I'm like, but you don't know if that guy is an offensive genius or if he was just under a guy that is an offensive genius, right?
Or as a Broncos fan, did you hire a guy because he worked so well with Aaron Rodgers?
Yes.
And then you're shocked when he doesn't have Aaron Rodgers that he's not the genius you thought he was. I've never understood that. Well, this guy did great things with Tom Brady. It's because he had freaking Tom Brady. This guy was wonderful with Aaron Rodgers because he had Aaron Rodgers. You don't have Aaron Rodgers.
Or how a lot of the Belichick tree hasn't had really a lot of success as coaches. It's like exactly. You're trying to get the next Belichick. When in regard, you have to understand the situation they're coming from, their responsibility, their profile, their personality. Like so many things go into making a good coach.
Right.
So,
somebody made a point that the Michigan last year brought in Mike McDonald to replace their former coach, who was too complex.
Yeah.
And he didn't run the same defense he ran with the Ravens. He had adapted to what he had at Michigan, and they could execute it at a high level. That's a great point. Joe Medina brought that up in the chat. That's a great point.
It's a really good point.
Are you willing to make that adjustment to, hey, I got college kids. Let me here, because I feel like Al Golden went and this is a mistake this is the mistake that a lot of NFL coaches make, to his point. Is they put more on the plate and then say, okay, well, that's too much, and then they take off. I'm a big believer, say, come in, let's teach the fundamentals, let's teach these kids how to play. Then as I add more and more and more on, then I can learn what their volume is, their mental volume is, that they can absorb, process, and play fast. And then you get to the point where, as you start to put more and more on them, you get to that point where it becomes a diminishing returns. Okay, we've now gone too far. Let's scale back.
Right.
And whereas Al Golden put too much on and he kept taking like a little bit off and a little bit off till but he never got to where they could do it all. You know what I mean? And I think that's why in college you start with the basics first and then build onto it. And then sometimes if you got smart kids, you can keep building and building and building and building and building. And that's cool. But you've got to have the foundation first. And that's what Notre Dame was missing this year on defense. The foundation wasn't there. And I think that's honestly something that's going to end up benefiting the offense next year, is how basic they had to be this year. Like duo next year is going to be a lot more effective if they have a very similar run game plan like they had against South Carolina, where they were running inside zone, counter, 2 different counters, inside zone, outside zone, jet sweeps, quarterback kicks, like all different types of things. There were so many different concepts. And now all of a sudden duo is just, by the fourth quarter, they were just running duo up there, whats, because they had worn them down with all the other stuff. But they got so good at duo, and so yeah, it's going to be interesting. So yeah, I want to just see him kind of say, hey, let's get back to basics and let's really not start over from scratch. That's not realistic, but just say, hey, look, let's figure out what these kids are really good at and then add on to it and see what they can handle.
Yep.
David M says, what are your thoughts and insights on the Jaden Rashada situation? Our incoming freshman really getting $13 million. We had another question about that too. And the answer, David, is no, they're not, which is why he's leaving Florida, because they're not paying him the money that they promised him. Archer also asked a similar question. It says, what's your take on Jaden Rashada asking out of his NIL to Florida due to his alleged $13 million deal not being worth anywhere near $13 million? Here's what I'll say. I've heard people say, well, both of these sides look bad. I don't think Jaden Rashada should look bad at all. Here's the thing. Ryan, if I hired you to do a job, hey, Ryan, I'm going to pay you X amount of dollars to come work for me. And you leave your teaching job, you come work for me, and you agree to come work for me. You've left your teaching job, you've signed a contract, and then when you show up, I'm like, oh, by the way, I'm not going to actually pay you that. I'm only going to pay you this.
Yeah.
What would you say to me?
I'm
probably some words you can't say on this show because this is a family-friendly channel. But yeah, you wouldn't say, oh, I get it, man. All good. I'll still play. Right? Like, look, here's the deal. Jaden Rashada is from Northern California, I believe, correct?
Yes.
He went to Miami because they offered him X amount of dollars. Yep. Right? This is a kid that my understanding is the background he comes from. I think I understand a little bit his desire to be more of an NIL-oriented guy. I don't necessarily agree with him making that the only basis of his decision, but that's his choice. He decided to make it. Right? And he told everybody that got involved very early on, this is going to be the factor in my decision.
It's been well known too. Yeah.
Never hit it. Now, some of the amounts he would kind of push back. It wasn't quite that much, whatever. But everybody knew NIL was going to be the deciding factor. He was honest about it. No problem.
Which is fine. Yeah.
Went to Miami for X number of dollars. Florida offered him an even bigger deal. He went to Florida. And then it was after he signed his NIL that they then said, oh, by the way, we're canceling what we said we were going to pay you because for whatever reason. And there's been all types of rumors about how, the agent said this but the reality is they agreed to that number. And so why should Jaden Rashada be held to play somewhere where they basically lied to him to get him there? Why? Nobody in this chat, in my opinion, now I'm doing what I hate when people do, so I'm projecting things onto people. But as adults, as business people, like I was talking to my dad today. My dad's a process server, right? That's the business he's done for years. I said, if you came to some agreement with a law firm that you were going to serve all their subpoenas and they were going to pay you X number of dollars per subpoena, and then you went and picked up 1,000 subpoenas at their office at the courthouse, and they called you before you served, they called you and say, hey, well, we said we were going to pay you 15, but we're going to pay you 2. My dad was like, I would take those subpoenas to their office and drop them off on their, on the desk and say, best of luck serving these subpoenas yourself, right? Because we made an agreement, and you said you're going to do this, and now it's not like they said they're going to only pay him 11, and they weren't going to pay him anywhere close to that. And he said, screw you, because this is the only reason I came here.
Right.
So I got no problem with what Jaden Rashada is doing. And honestly, I think Florida looks stupid, in my opinion. So
Don't disagree.
I think they look stupid. And good luck trying to convince the next kid to take an agreement.
I was talking to someone about that the other day, Brian. It's like, why would anyone ever trust Florida about an NIL number again, right? It's like it's just such a bad look. And that's further why I just have some questions about the Florida coaching staff and the regime that is there right now and getting it turned around because I mean, right or wrong, the NIL landscape with how they can manipulate it can help them get a lot of talent in the door, right? It can. There's no doubt. Jaden Rashada was ready to come to Florida for it. But at the end of the day, if you can't give what you promised, no one's going to believe you.
And the other thing, too, is they had committed so much to him that they didn't have any to commit to other players, which is why they didn't finish very strong. So now, not only did you not get the kids that you couldn't give because you committed the money to him, you're not even getting him now at this point.
And if you're Florida now, you lost Anthony Richardson. I think there was another quarterback that transferred. You have Graham Mertz coming in, and you don't have a freshman quarterback in the class anymore.
Yeah, it's not good.
Because of the Marcus Stokes situation and then obviously Jaden Rashada situation. Like, you don't have – oof.
Yeah, it's not a good look. And here's the other part of this too, Ryan, is, number one, they should have never offered him $13 million to begin with.
No.
There is not a high school quarterback in the country, Arch, Dante, none of them worth anywhere close to $13 million. Not even close. I wouldn't pay him $1 million. These are high school quarterbacks. I can give you a long list of talented 5-star quarterbacks that did do jack in college.
Yep.
So none of them are worth that. That's not the point. The point isn't, well, he's not worth that. So you're worth at the end of the day. You're when I say worth, I mean they're not making that like if I sign you to a contract and I'm paying you X amount of dollars, it's because I think you're at the very least going to produce that much in volume. In reality,
Sure.
I'm thinking you should probably produce more. Otherwise, I'm not staying in business. If
Yep.
I hired you, to work for me for X number of dollars, Ryan, and all you produced was X number of dollars, I'm not hurting business wise because I'm still producing my own, content stuff, but I'm not really helped a ton either, because my business didn't actually grow. So I can't then use revenue to go do this, but I've hired you to X amount of dollars. You produce beyond that amount of dollars. And so then that allows us to do other things as a business, right? I mean, so but at the end of the day, your value is what people are willing to pay you at the end of the day.
Yep.
And so the reality is he's not worth $13 million from the standpoint of he directly can guaranteed is going to produce $13 million worth of revenue because of what he does beyond what they were already doing, right? Because the collective is not the school. They're not selling jerseys and all those other kind of things. They're just giving them that money.
Yep.
And in that regard, the kid's not worth that in a traditional value standpoint, but he was worth it to the standpoint because they offered it to him.
Exactly.
And so they should have stuck to their word or told him a lot longer. They didn't just wake up 2 days after signing day and realize, oh, gee, we don't have the money to pay this kid. Or we're not going to. They knew. And so to me, you know what? That's what you get. That's what you get. I want to see more of this. I want to see more of this happen where these schools just look stupid. I was told by somebody that's, connected with a college in athletic program that there's kids in basketball that are injured and not playing. But the reason they're actually not playing is because they were promised X amount of dollars and they're not getting paid. But they said, well, you should still play. Why? How many of you, if your business said, hey, next month I'm not paying you, would still show up and go to work? Hey, I know I agreed to pay you, but I'm not going to do that anymore. Or you go through a couple paycheck periods and all of a sudden, hey, I'm not getting my paycheck. What gives? Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. Just keep playing. Okay, I may do that for a couple more weeks, but if I get to another pay period and the check didn't come, hey, buddy, you agreed to this, right? You agreed to give me this money. It's not like I came on a full scholarship and I just then asked for money and you said no and I said, screw it, I'm not playing. I would crush that kid. That kid. But that's not what's happening here. You offered a kid a certain amount to entice him to come to your school. And if you're not willing to own up to your end of the bargain, don't be pissed when he says, well, I'm not owning up to my end of the deal. I'd say that kid has a pretty good sense of how business works already, is what I would say.
Sure.
So I'm not hammering the kid for this because Jaden never hid the fact that he was going there because they got to give him a big NIL deal. If it was, he would have gone to Miami otherwise or stayed out west. And so, no, he's not worth $13 million. No. But they promised it to him and they should have paid him it. And if they're not willing to do that or not able to do that, fine. Then let him out of his deal and he goes somewhere else. And then that's a message to the next group of recruits that you promise money to say, hey, Florida's not really a group that sticks to their word. Ugh. You may be careful about that one. Want to be careful about that one. And this is going to happen more and more and more because honestly, I don't even know if they signed a contract. I don't know if there was a contract to be signed.
Right.
A lot of this stuff is just, hey, this is what we're telling you. And these kids, honestly, but this is a kid. This isn't some kid where they manipulated the family and the kid. This kid has an agent,
right?
Which you're allowed to have. You're allowed to have NIL representation. So this deal got worked out. So there had to be some sort of agreement, whether it's an official contract that was signed or some sort of, terms that will be agreed upon once he gets to college or something. There was some sort of agreement that was worked out through the agent that they said they're not going to pay.
I just can't understand how Florida let this get to this point. I just can't understand it because even if somehow, and this is incredibly highly unlikely, that you would have pulled what you did and Jaden Rashad is like, oh, it's okay, I'll still come play. How does that kid ever trust that staff again, right? Like, how do they ever trust that school again? I just don't understand where you can't build trust in that way. Why would that kid stay initially to begin with? But also, if he decides to actually stick, why would he stick there long term? It's such a lose-lose situation. I don't see how that could have ever gone positive for Florida.
Yeah. It was bad. And we're going to see more and more of this, to be honest with you, especially with quarterbacks.
Yeah.
We're going to see a lot more of this.
Yep.
John A1 with something here. He says the linebacker play is going to need to be at least good in 23. Can't be the weakness of the defense again. Notre Dame recruits the linebacker position better than any other, and their play needs to begin to match the talent. 1,000% agree with that comment.
Yep.
1,000% agree. Got a question.
I was just going to say, if the production doesn't match the talent, then there's an issue and you need to make a change. That's point blank to it. So I agree,
as I've always said, if it's just one kid not matching up, if it was just Maris who didn't live up to expectation, but like, hey, look, he was always a kid that was a little bit raw. Maybe he just doesn't have a feel for the game. But when everybody kind of takes a step back, you're like, okay, this is a problem.
Exactly.
BK, 99 problems, BK1. How complex? We actually answered that earlier during the show. He's got another one. For the sake of this question, let's assume the defense is a top 25 to 30 defense again in 23. Can the offense improve enough to still be a legit title contender, or does the D need to be in the top 20? I would say this, Ryan. I think that the offense can improve enough for them to be a playoff team. I don't think Notre Dame can win a championship with a top 25 to 30 defense, because that requires, to me, 2018 Clemson, 2019 LSU type offense. And I don't think they have that.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Georgia's defense took a step back this year. They were still a top 15 defense, in my view.
Still a good defense, yeah.
You know what I mean? They just weren't a top 3 defense like they were the year before.
Right.
So they weren't like a top 30 defense. I'm actually going to look up the efficiency numbers now to that one. But yeah, I don't think Notre Dame is ever going to be the kind of offense that can overcome a defense that is 25 to 30, in my opinion. Because
I think we need to temper our expectations a little bit, in the sense that I don't think Sam Hartman's going to come here at Notre Dame in his only year and throw 39 touchdowns like he did at Wake Forest, right? Like, I mean, that's a different offense, that's a different situation. That's a different schedule that he's playing against, right? I mean, you're hoping that he is very good in Notre Dame's system and brings a level of consistency. And if that happens, I think that there will be a very good to excellent football team. But at the end of the day, I don't know if we're talking about historic team offensively, So,
correct.
Yeah.
So, to me, Ryan, I look at it and I say, I mean, I could see Sam Hartman combining for 39 touchdowns. It's 6 or 7 run. I mean, he had 11 rushing touchdowns. I mean, he had 50 the year before in 2021. Mm-hmm. He had 40 touchdowns this year, correct? 39 passing and 1 rushing.
I believe so, yeah.
Would I be shocked if he got to 40 touchdowns this year? Probably not, but it's going to be like a lot of little 5-yard touchdowns because teams are loading the box and he's just pulling little bootlegs and throwing it outside. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. But if he gets to 30 to 35 touchdowns and he's throwing for 3,500 yards and he's completing plus 60% and he's averaging 8.5 to 9 yards per attempt, this offense is going to be really flipping good. Really flipping good. Because the thing about him is if you look at some of the numbers that Notre Dame had this year, for example, like if you look at Drew Pine, right, 64.6% completion, 155.27 passer rating, and all that kind of stuff. Those are good numbers that some fans and some people look to say, oh, he was a pretty good player. 22 to 6 touchdown interception ratio. I don't care about that. Average 8 yards an attempt. That's really low. Yep. And the other part is it's not so much about the throws you made, but the throws you didn't make. Not the throws you missed, the throws you didn't make. And that was the bigger issue with the quarterback play. This year, it was the issue with Ian Book. Ian Book had good completion percentage and had some years where he had good, yards per attempt numbers and all that. Well, the reality is Ian Book's last 2 years as a starting quarterback, he had the same or worse yards per attempt numbers as what Drew Pine had this year. In 2019, he was 7.6. In 2020, he was 8.0. And the only good year that he really had, I mean, his best year was 2018 at 8.4. That's a good number. It's not a great number. It's not you're a championship caliber quarterback number, and that's top 20-ish, but it wasn't so much that. It's a lot of that production came from really good players that could go make plays. And so when I look at it, Ryan, and I see that kind of production, Notre Dame ranked 37th in the country this year in yards per pass attempt. That's not terrible, but it's not the kind that's going to win you a championship. Exactly. And to me, that's where I look at it and say it's that kind of number to me that has to get better and has to be more effective and has to be more efficient. And if they can get that to that level, then I start feeling really good about where this football team can be. And that's the number. That's the kind of number that matters to me, to be completely honest with you. I mean, if you look at the playoff this year, Ohio State was 9.5 and Georgia was 9.0 yards per attempt. The worst was Michigan at 8.3. And that's because they were a very heavy run dominant team.
Yep.
and didn't have a very efficient quarterback play, but they still finished 24th in yards per attempt this year. So if he has like a, close to 9, 8.7, 8.8 yards per attempt, and he's completing 60+%, and he's a 30 touchdown, 9-10 interception guy, 3,500 yards, this offense is going to be filthy because the run game is going to be there.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I think the offense could be a top 10 offense this year in effectiveness, not so much scoring because the defense is going to be different. Just the schedule's not conducive to that. The style of play is not conducive to that. You're not going to be running as many plays as other teams, that kind of thing. The point, however, Ryan, is that it'll be a top 10 defense from an efficiency and effectiveness standpoint. My 38 is like you scoring 45 because we're limiting possessions. Mm-hmm. So the other team doesn't have even as many possessions. So you start getting into the really analytical minutia of points per possession, which is one of the analytic numbers that I like, actually, because that matters to me. If I'm scoring 38 and you're scoring 44, but you've got 3 extra possessions per game because you go a million miles an hour, then your offense actually isn't better than mine.
No.
Because you need more. It's like basketball. It's a great example. You got 2 guys that score 20 points a game. One does it on 19 shots a game. One does it on 12, right? Give me the guy that does it on 12, right? Because he's more efficient.
Yep.
And there's always caveats. Well, yeah, it's 12, but that's because he shoots 8 times more free throws. Well, okay, but that's because he's attacking and he's getting free shots. He's getting free. I mean, I'm going to have a much higher field goal percent, unless I'm Shaquille O'Neal or guys like, like big centers. You're going to have a higher free throw percentage than a field goal percentage. So if I'm getting fouled a bunch because of the way I play, and I'm only taking 12 official shots, but I'm going 9 of 10 from the free throw line every game, I'm going to be a more efficient basketball player than the guy that scores 20 points a game, taking 20 shots a game.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's no different in football, right? I don't care about the yards and the points as much as I care about the efficiency of it and the ability to also be explosive. And if the offense can get that, Notre Dame's going to be really good next year. But they still need a top 15 defense if they want to win it all. And perfect example, TCU. TCU had a great offense this year. Great offense this year. The end of the year, the game where their offense faltered, couldn't win because their defense wasn't good enough to keep them in the game.
Yep.
The game where their quarterback just couldn't hit those shots and couldn't find those openings and all that other kind of stuff, they got blown out. Why? Because they weren't good enough on defense to keep them in the game. And that's, to me, the difference here. And so when you look at this year, Georgia had the number 1 efficiency defense in the country this year, and where was TCU? They were 25th. Not good enough. It's
especially
not
higher
bad.
than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, because they had a good defense during the year. I mean, they had some games where their defense played good football. They play in a league with teams that can score. But at the end of the day, they couldn't make enough stops. I mean, let's be honest. If they don't have 2 pick sixes, they don't beat Michigan. Because they couldn't stop Michigan in the second half.
No.
And so why were we surprised they couldn't stop Georgia? The only surprise for me was that I thought they would score more. But their offense was so Georgia can go to a game, perfect example. Defense against Ohio State plays awful. Ohio State's ripping them up. So why'd they win the game? Because their offense could keep them in the game long enough. And their defense finally made a couple stops late in the game, and they won because their offense carried them. You got to be good on both if you want to be a champion. Being great on one side and just good on the other will get you to the playoff. But you can't be, and this is the thing, is there's so many people that don't know how to have this argument, Ryan. The defense does not win championships anymore. It doesn't. Defense will get you to play. If you can't get to the playoff, in my opinion, at Notre Dame, if you're not a really good defense. But you're not, they had a really good defense in 2018, and they lost by 27. They held Clemson 2 touchdowns below their season average and got blown out. Why? Because once you get to that level, you got to be able to score.
Yep.
But you also can't be a sieve on defense. Otherwise, you're TCU and you're Oklahoma. Right? But to be a champion, you have to score. But what's missed in that is people don't understand that we're not saying you can suck on defense. Never said that. That's a silly argument. But you got to be able to score. And that's the reality of it. Top 25, 30 defense doesn't get it done. Because if Georgia was a top 30 defense this year, Ryan, they score 42 against Ohio State, but they lose because they give up 52. Right?
Yep.
So there you go. Here's a question here from William Chesney. This is a good one. Hey, Coach, who would you rather have in this class, Ronan Hannafin or Brandon Hillman? So I'm going to say this. The way the class shaked out, if that was my option, it was just one, I can only have one of those two. I'm taking Brandon Hillman because of the need.
Yes.
Ronan, to me, was more of a rover on defense. If he was going to play defense and a really good wide receiver. To me, Ronan Hannafin's he's the higher ranked player in my top 250, right? He'll be slightly higher than Brandon Hillman, who's a better football player than I think a lot of people realize. That's one of the guys that I think On 3 got right. They had him like 139. That's close to where I'd have him. Maybe a couple spots higher, a couple spots lower, but it's close. Ronan Hannafin, to me, when healthy, is a top 100 guy. But it's about putting a class together that fits what your needs are. Once you got Greathouse and Braylon and Caleb Smith and Rico, you didn't need Ronan Hannafin a receiver anymore. So then you look at defense. Well, he can help you on defense. But Rover's not really where the need was. I think Brandon Hillman can play Rover. I flat out think he can play Rover. But I also think he can play safety.
Yeah.
Ronan's not a safety. Ronan would have outgrown safety in 5 minutes. I mean, am I wrong?
If he hasn't already,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, you had always said you thought he was a will, correct? Am I like on defense?
Rover,
you thought he'd
Rover
grow into
will.
a will, right?
Rover
you thought he'd
will.
start at Rover. I thought you said he'd start at Rover and grow into a will. Is what I thought you had said. I might be confusing him with somebody else.
Sounds like something. Yeah.
But that's not a safety, and they needed a guy that could play safety. So this isn't sour grapes. I love Ronan Hannafin as a player. He's a little banged up as a senior. I think he's a heck of a player. My point is simply, based on how the class shaked out, if I could only have one of those two, Brandon Hillman fills the bigger need, in my opinion. Okay. And he's still a really good football player, just not quite as good as Ronan, in my opinion.
I mean, with how everything shook out, especially at the end there, right? I mean, you had a need to bring in another safety, and Brandon Hillman's skill set to be able to play so many different spots is a huge bonus at that point, right? Because you're like, he can play safety. If things shake out differently at safety, and maybe I feel better about what we have in the room a year from now or whatever it is this season, like whenever that happens, then he could also come down and play Rover if I wanted to, or if there's a injury on offense where he needs to go over and play. I think that the versatility is the big selling point, because I do think that Ronan Hannafin's a versatile player. I mean, we talked about that, right? To be able to play a couple different spots. But I think that there's not many players in the 2023 class that have as much versatility as Brandon Hillman. Like literally, if you would have told me he's a safety, he's a rover, he's a running back, he's a slot receiver, whatever, I would have been like, cool, sounds good to me, man. Right. Like he could do all those things. So I think with how everything shook out, I agree completely with you. Yeah. He fits a need. And I don't think that there's as big a separation where it's like, oh, but you have to take the much better football player. Like I think they're both very good football players.
Agree. Somebody said down, Jason Smith said, Talich fills the safety need. I don't think he's a safety. I think he's going to be a rover linebacker in a hurry. That kid's a line. That kid. This isn't about how he runs. That kid's got his disposition screams linebacker.
He's going to be. If he never becomes a stalwart on defense, he's definitely going to be a special teams player. There's no doubt.
Look, and we didn't talk about him during the show because he's a walk-on, right? And I need to see him in person and all that. But look, Luke Talich can play. That kid can play. That kid's a scholarship caliber player. I will not be shocked if I will be a little surprised if he's on scholarship, if he's a walk-on for 4 years. I'll be surprised.
Yeah.
He's the kind of kid you're like junior year, sophomore year, some scholarships came open. Okay, let's get this kid. Yes. Brandon, you had a story on Jason Kia today, right? Jason was his first name, or is it
Josiah?
Josiah Kia today. Yep. To me, the fact that they're recruiting him tells me they want his brother back.
Yeah.
Which then starts you kind of looking forward to that 2024 season of, okay, that's if Kahanu's going to come back, that's kind of a 2024 commit already, a linebacker, in my opinion. So something to think about there too. But there's other kids not on the board right now that we're talking about that could be a factor some way, shape, form, or fashion, whether it's special teams, a linebacker down the road. But when you talk about Luke Talich, Ryan, I think he's going to fill out pretty quickly.
Yes.
And I think he's going to end up being a linebacker, like a rover will type of guy, in my opinion.
I could see that. I could definitely see that.
Yeah. That's how I see that. Next question from 99 Problems, but became one. Should the future of the Notre Dame Rover be a linebacker such as Snead or Ziegler, or a safety such as Schuler or Minich? And if you had to pick who on today's team would play Rover for you? So the answer to your first question is yes.
It's a little of both. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. You need both, because in some games you're going to want a Ziegler Snead. Like if I'm playing Georgia, I want a Rover that's a Jalen Snead, Nolan Ziegler, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah type. I think that gives you a better chance of matching up against their linebackers, matching up their running game. If you're a 3-3-5, and what did Marcus Freeman do when he played Georgia? They didn't play a lot of 3-3-5. They had some different looks because they knew we can't play our base defense. We have to be able to go big against them. Now, Georgia's a little bit more of a passing team now than they were then. But the point is, you've got to have the versatility. You've got to be able to do both. But you do need, however, in my opinion, the Snead Ziegler type at Rover. You need the twitchy guy that's long and can run and cover, that can flip his hips and run on a wheel route, that can flip his hips and cover a tight end up the seam, that can drive downhill and blow up a bubble screen or a quick throw. There's a need for that guy. But I don't need that guy as much if I'm playing USC. I don't need that guy as much when I'm playing NC State. I don't need that guy as much when I'm playing Wake Forest. I don't need that guy as much, honestly, when I'm playing Alabama, the way that Alabama's been the last 2 years. I don't need that third linebacker against Alabama. I don't. Yep. I need a guy that can run and cover. And so it just depends on who you're playing. But the point is, Ryan, there's teams where you need the linebacker. And so you've got to be able to do both, in my opinion.
Can I say something to the safety conversation, though, to play that Rover spot? I wouldn't actually include Ben Minich in that conversation, though. I would say it be Schuler or Hillman in my conversation.
Yeah, agree.
Because I think Minich is a willing tackler. He can come down, he can hit. It's all good, but he's more of a on the roof guy, in my opinion, right? Like
I want him playing from depth.
Exactly.
Yes, agree.
Hillman and Schuler, I believe, could be a huge asset in run support against screens. Also play some man-to-man coverage against bigger slots. Like I think that those are the guys that I would rather have in that safety conversation.
And Hillman has the length for that position.
Yes.
And that's what I liked about him as a Rover is he's so long. And when I talked about him when they first got him as a Rover, it's in the role that you're talking about here, 99, which is more of that traditional hybrid player, not a linebacker.
Yep.
And that's kind of what I saw from him.
Because I would say, like, if we're talking about Minich in that role, that's more of a nickel at that point, right? And why would I put Minich in that nickel when I could just put a nickel out there? You know what I mean? Like, it's just, yeah.
Agree. Here's a question for you, Ryan, because this is more NFL related, but Jason Rose asks, hey guys, could Jalen Snead develop into what Micah Parsons was? Is not saying he's the same caliber, but I'm just talking role wise. So I haven't really watched much Cowboys, so I couldn't answer this question. So this is all you, Ryan.
So basically on a snap to snap basis, Micah Parsons is technically the starting will linebacker because they have number 55, Leighton Vander Esch, that came out of Boise State a few years ago. So basically, Brian, they play him as one of the true inside linebackers. And then on, from a snap-to-snap basis, he might also just come and play on ball as an edge rusher, right? So he kind of rotates back and forth.
So is that a lot of like what you were talking about earlier? I mean, that's kind of what you were saying, a little bit smaller body, but what you were saying earlier with Jalen Snead, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from a usage perspective, a little bit, Jason. I mean, I don't think it's the same just because – I mean, so when I want to use Jalen Snead off the edge, it's more as like a late fixture to bring him up, right? Like they put Micah Parsons down as a defensive end a ton and just say, like, you're our end on this play, go rush the quarterback. I want to use more Jalen Snead of like blitzing from different spots and coming off the edge a ton, working from depth still a little bit, right? Like I don't want him to play on ball like Micah Parsons does. So similar in the sense that you can use him off the edge. You can use them on the second level and kind of sporadically use them in different ways in that regard. But I just think of how it's presented is a little bit different, if that makes sense. Like I'm not lining up Jalen Snead as a defensive end on a multiple snaps and just telling him to go. That's more what Micah Parsons does. I'm using him to be a player that works from depth, that could come off the edge, could blitz a B gap, could kind of come from different spots as that off-ball linebacker.
So good question. Very good question. Great answer, Ryan. Well, great question, great answer. Jason also says, hey, guys, could you see Snead? Oh, sorry, he did that twice. See, he put that, but then he realized he didn't put the MB on there and did it. Very well done. Very well done. All right, here's one, Ryan. Archer452. Hey, Ryan, who would you take QB1 in this draft?
Archer, you don't want to hear this, man. You're not going to want to hear this because it's not CJ Stroud, unfortunately. It is Bryce Young. Bryce Young would be my guy from Alabama. I know that he has some size concerns that some NFL evaluators are honestly just going to nitpick, and some will even take off their board if the guy is a little bit more old-fashioned in their view. Just something about Bryce, man, with how he sees the game, with how he operates, with the anticipation he plays with, how he sees it. Right? And I mean, C.J. Stroud is my quarterback 2 in this conversation, and pretty clear quarterback 2 in this 2023 class for me. But I just think it's Bryce Young, man. I just think he sees it at a different level than everybody else in this class. So it's Bryce Young for me.
I don't think CJ made the jumps I hoped he would make this year. Because he was my QB1 going into the season, and a couple things hurt him, and it was more for college, not the draft.
Yes.
But not having Jackson Smith and Jigba hurt, not having that slot guy hurt, because he's a kid that likes to throw over the middle of the field, and he didn't really have that this year the way that he did last year. And not that they were bad, but they just weren't as good as Jackson Smith and Jigba. But to me, if I met Bryce Young in person and I looked at him physically and measured him up and said, okay, I think he can handle the quarterback position physically, and he's my number 1. But I just look at Tua and look at some of those guys and you say, boy, that's a big concern. But then you flip the script and like, yeah, but Russell Wilson was a very healthy quarterback for most of his early career. Jalen Hurts, was able to handle it. And then, of course, he gets hurt later in the year. But that's my big concern, Ryan, is can he hold up in the NFL for 10 years?
Yep.
That's a legitimate – that's the question you have to have. So if it's close, I'd have to think about the other one. But Bryce just as a pure passer is – he's one of the best just pure throwers of the football. And when I mean that, I mean all that goes into throwing, anticipation, reads, all that stuff. When I say a great thrower of the football, that's what I'm referring to. A guy that just knows how to throw it at beautiful ball, accuracy, power, knows where to go, throws with great anticipation. He's got all the tools. He's just small. And I don't think he's 6 foot, and I don't think he's 200 pounds. And that's my concern. Is can he hold up over a 17-game season in the regular season and then maybe have to play 4 more postseason games? Can he do that? I have major concerns about that. I hope he can. But he couldn't even do that for a full 2 years at Alabama, if we're being honest. He only missed 1 game this year, but still, he missed a game. So, Ryan, I don't disagree with anything he said, but I understand why some people have legitimate concerns about his size. I really do.
I get, and ultimately, I understand it too from the sense that it's an outlier type of thing, right? Yeah. It's like, is it becoming more prevalent than it once was? Sure. There's the Kyler Murrays now, the Russell Wilsons. Yeah. There's more examples of it, but to your point, it's still an outlier, no matter how you cut it. And I get that 100%. And I agree that it would be a talking point in the room.
Right.
He missed 1 game in 2 years, but one thing is that it wasn't anything like a substantial injury, right? It's like
landed on
hip, right? Like
and concussions and all that, right?
Yes, yeah.
Here's another thing too that would then play in Bryce's favor. Bryce is not a running quarterback.
He's not.
He is a pocket passer. He's more Drew Brees than he is Russell Wilson, and he's definitely not Lamar Jackson and guys like that, Jalen Hurts. He's not anything like those guys. He's Drew Brees with a better arm. If you want to give me he's a more athletic, stronger armed version of Drew Brees. But Drew Brees was still a stout guy, but he wasn't huge. He wasn't 230, So you just have to look at it that way, in my opinion. And I think but I think the arm talent's special and the mind is special.
Yes.
It's just the body. Can he hold up? That's it. I'll tell you who it's not going to be. It's not going to be freaking Will Levis. That's for darn sure. Ryan, he's not a top 3 round quarterback for me.
I don't disagree with your evaluation of him. I am very cold on Will Levis. and it's coming out in the, just the natural conversations happening now, right? But there's a better chance that Will Levis is quarterback 1 in April than it is that he's quarterback 3.
Which is why the NFL sucks with a quarterback.
I get
That's why you've got Tyler Huntley and Skylar Thompson starting playoff games. That's why there's like this really good group at the top and then a bunch of nothing underneath it. Is because teams keep drafting guys like this. big arm, big body, blah, 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 blah. He can't play quarterback at an elite level. He wasn't even that good in the SEC.
I had a comp that not too many people liked a while ago on Will Levis. I compared him to Jake Locker.
Yeah.
And that's
an older person, Jim Druckenmiller is one for me.
Jim Druckenmiller.
Yeah. Huge cannon for an arm. Couldn't play quarterback. Couldn't play quarterback. The fact that the NFL still sucks at quarterback evaluation is just like Zach Wilson's. Ryan, that was so predictable that this is exactly who Zach Wilson was going to be.
Yeah.
Like no college football fan is shocked that Zach Wilson is what he is in the NFL, but they convinced themselves he was something because he could stand on a knee and throw the ball 80 yards. Who freaking cares? That's also why you drafted Kyle Bowler in the first round. Like they keep making the same mistake over and over. And Jay Henry just literally, as soon as I said that, Jay Henry just put that in the chat.
Kyle Bowler.
Yes, but off the delay, I guarantee he didn't hear what I said yet. But like it's exactly that. It's they keep drafting these big-armed, tall dudes that can't play quarterback.
Yep.
And how anyone could look at Will Levis and try and tell me he's a better quarterback than C.J. Stroud. Now, if you want to say you have your doubts about C.J. Stroud as a pro, totally get it. Totally get it.
And you can live in both worlds where you have some concern, but also that's ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. But here's like, to me, there's only one quarterback that I'd take in the top 10 this year. Top 5 this year. One. That's it. That's Bryce Young. If he passed my physical test.
Yeah.
For me, Will Levis is not a day 1 or a day 2 pick. Unless the only need I have on my team is as a backup quarterback. Right? Just not doing it. Not doing it. CJ Stroud, I got some questions, but in the right offense, CJ Stroud can be really good.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No doubt.
But like in Sean McVay's offense, okay.
Oh,
yeah,
for
sign
sure.
me up. Sign
For
me
sure.
up. In Kyle Shanahan's offense, he'd be pretty good, but maybe not quite as good as and then there's in the Baltimore Ravens offense,
Bryce Young would be really good in the Kyle Shanahan offense.
Yes.
He'd be very good in that offense.
He'd be good in any offense that just wants him to drop back and throw the football. I mean, he's got more scheme versatility to me than any of the other quarterbacks. Other than like you don't want him to go play for the Ravens if they're going to ask him to do what Lamar does, which they wouldn't do. They only do that with Lamar because that's who Lamar is.
That is who, yes.
And they have to get backups that can do what Lamar does because otherwise they have to completely change their offense.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's what gives Tyler Huntley and Anthony Brown and Trace McSorley jobs, man. That's what does it.
NFL, I still can't believe after all these years that they're not better at evaluating quarterbacks than they are. You'd think they'd learn, but they keep it's like the same guy every year.
It's because a lot of the decision makers.
Somebody said Mitch Trubisky. Yeah, it's another example. You passed on Pat Mahomes. You traded up.
Deshaun Watson.
You traded up to pass on Pat Mahomes and Deshaun Watson to get Mitch frigging Trubisky.
Yep.
It's not just one team. It's a lot of teams. They just keep making this mistake. Jared Goff being number 1 overall pick. Jared Goff's a good NFL quarterback. He's a good, solid NFL quarterback. If he'd have been drafted in the 3rd round, the perception of Jared, and this is true too, Ryan, where you get picked changes your perception.
Oh, no doubt.
Jared Goff being the number 1 overall pick means people are just not, they're never going to respect him as an NFL quarterback because he's never going to play anywhere close to what you'd expect from a number 1 overall pick or a top 15 pick. Mm-hmm. If he was a 3rd or 4th round pick, the perception of him be, hey, he's a pretty good football player. It's why I think people allowed Dak Prescott so much time to develop as a player. Because the perception was, well, that guy's a 4th round draft pick, right? Was it 3rd or 4th? What was that?
He was
4th. So you're going to give him more time. Where Josh Rosen got rid off after a year, rightfully so. Kirk Cousins, another great example.
He was a 4th round,
Right. Mm-hmm. Where if Kirk Cousins was a top 5 pick, the perception of him would be a lot different.
Oh, his first 3 years were bad. He never would have gotten another shot. So yeah.
So those are all things that you look at, but I just still can't believe that they still suck at evaluating quarterbacks.
I'm telling you, man, it's not even just general managers. The scouting world is old.
Oh yeah,
it's archaic. They look and they're like, he's tall, he's white, and he has a strong arm. He's good.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. No, they're the dudes from in the Moneyball scene.
Yes.
He's got a good face. He's got an ugly girlfriend. All that kind of stuff.
How's he hit?
Yeah. Well, but
it's got potential.
Yeah. So you're saying he's not a good hitter, but he's gonna, that kind of. I mean, it's just all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
And like Brock Purdy was the last pick of the draft, And he wasn't great in college, but there's a lot of big-armed quarterbacks. I would take Brock Purdy over every single day of the freaking week. And why is Skylar Thompson? The point about Skylar Thompson, not a knock on, but Skylar Thompson is a gamer. He knows how to play quarterback. He's just not really talented, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he knows how to play.
Right.
So when all the dust settles, he's the guy playing, not some of these other big-armed guys that aren't in the league anymore. And so I can't believe they're still so bad at that. So bad at that. Anyway, here's a good one from Jimmy McGill. Who's your favorite commit personality-wise? Christian Gray seems like an awesome kid from the interview on signing day.
He's an awesome kid. He is. Sullivan Absher is a fun time. He's a good dude, man. Talking to him on not even on this show, but down in San Antonio, he is a colorful, just kind of like all shucks country dude.
Yeah.
He's fun.
He's a country boy.
Fun. Yes.
Sam Pendleton might be it for me. I'd have to think about it. There's a couple
very well spoken.
I love Jeremiah Love personality-wise. Just such a really interesting, artsy, really talented kid. Not even talking about football. Just like a really he can draw. He's just got he's a really unique kid. Sam Pendleton's Sam Pendleton's ability to talk intellectually and about things and he's very open about his faith, but not in a way where it's like shoving it down your face. But also in certain other things, he's a big goofball in other. I mean, he's so comfortable in different settings. He's got a really unique personality. I really like him. I talked about Jeremiah Love. Christian Gray's got just a great personality, man.
He's a goofball, man. He's a goofball.
Drake Bowen's a good kid.
Yep.
I mean, they've got Adon Schuler is just always like he could be. You could hand him $1 million and he'd be happy, but his face would just be like,
yeah.
Thank you for this. I don't think I can express to you how much this means to me. And he's being serious. He's really excited, but it's just I would not want to play poker with Adon Schuler.
Yes.
He has one facial expression. That's it. And that's a good thing. It's not so there's some really unique kids in this class. There really
Devin Houston was a good interview. He was a good interview.
James is another one. I love Braylon James. I didn't get to know Jaden Greathouse the way that you did.
Yeah, Jane's a really smart. Well, he's a version of Sam Pendleton in the way that he can just articulate his points very well. He's a very smart kid. Who was a fun time getting to know down in San Antonio, even though I didn't get much opportunity to get to know him in the process, is Brandon Vernon's got an awesome personality, man. He does. He
doesn't want to be on social media. He just go fishing or hunting with that kid and you'll learn a lot about him.
I don't think I ever told you this story, Brian, but a quick one for people out there is Brennan does not like the social media thing, doesn't like the media thing, but he was very cordial all week because he understands that we're supporting him and we're, doing our jobs type of thing. The last day, though, it was after the game. Someone asked to take a picture of him in his game uniform, and Brennan was like, "I appreciate the support, man, but not today." Not today. I was like, "That's awesome."
Oh my goodness, that's funny. That kid's a trip.
He's a trip.
So that's a good question, Jimmy. Good question. Here's another one from Jimmy that I like. He says, "Who is an Irish player who surpassed your expectations the most based on your projection during recruiting?" I had Kyron Williams as one of the lowest ranked kids in the class.
Mm-hmm.
I did not. I thought he'd be a nice situational back, and that's it. He far surpassed what I thought he was going to be in college. That's the first one that kind of pops in my head recently, Ryan, is I didn't have much expectation for him as a player, and he was pretty good. He's pretty darn good.
Yeah.
One that pops in your head, because you haven't really been doing this, evaluating Notre Dame prospects for very long, so other than just as kind of a fan.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of something that there was perception and then wasn't. Can't really think of one because again, I haven't really been evaluating as much. I'm honestly just trying to think of a recruit that maybe wasn't super heavily named.
Jay Henry said Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah. I had Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah ranked very high. I had him as with a 4.5 star upside grade, and so he surpassed my expectations a little bit. But I thought very highly of Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah coming out.
I guess one for me might be Cam Hart, if I'm being honest, right? Because I remember, again, I didn't cover him. I was just he's a wide receiver, and yeah. So, oh yeah, sure.
yeah. Here's last couple, and then we got to run. Call Me Ty says, "Do you think Peyton Bowen didn't get his deposit from Oregon? That's why he changed his mind." I don't think so. I mean, and also, I don't have much respect for Peyton Bowen, but I don't think that's why. I don't think he wanted to go to Oregon. I don't think he ever wanted to go to Oregon. I think the only reason he picked Oregon was because he was convinced to do so by a parent. I think it's the only reason, because the parent wanted the money.
Yep.
I think I just think he always wanted to go to Oklahoma. but he just had this really weird thing where he couldn't be honest with people. He didn't want to upset anybody. And in reality, when you're that way, you end up pissing everybody off. And then it just crushes your character. But no, I don't think that's why.
I mean,
I don't.
I mean, again, I'm not trying to bury the kid, but you alienated the Notre Dame fans. You alienated the Oregon fans by doing what you did. And I'll even say, I thought Oklahoma fans would be very kind of over the top on Twitter when that stuff all happened and you eventually signed with them. But even some of them were just kind of like, man, I just want to get this over with. Like, this is exhausting, it's exhausting.
Yeah, very much so. Then last question, we'll answer this one quickly. Will C 2.0 mailbag question. How many years of eligibility would Kahanu Kia have when he comes back and around how old will he be? I mean, he'd basically be the age of a senior, right? So 21, 22, and he'll have 3 years of eligibility left. Now he'll have, so he actually played as a freshman. So he didn't redshirt. So technically he could be there 4 years. So they could bring him back, redshirt him, and he'd still have 3 years left. So he basically has 4 years to play 3. Essentially.
Which might be an interesting opportunity since he, has, I mean, I don't know how football shape he'll be in, right?
He's in Raleigh, North Carolina. So it's not like he's in some third world country where he can't work out. He's in Raleigh, North Carolina. There's plenty of gyms. There's plenty of fields to work out at. I mean, that's what people think when they hear Mormon Mission, they think he's going to this island somewhere in the Southeast Pacific that hasn't seen has no technology and they still have spirit. There's actually, there's actually islands like that. I was watching this really fascinating documentary where they still there's tribes in South America and stuff where there's still spears and no technology and all that. It's wild. But that's not where all these kids are. That's not where most of these kids are going. I've had kids on Mormon missions come to my house here in Indiana. You know what I mean? And it's you were knocked on the wrong house, buddy. You know what I mean? Because we're going to have a conversation. But most of these kids aren't going to those type of places, and he's in Raleigh, North Carolina. So as long as he wants to be in shape, he'll be in shape. Now that's not football shape.
Exactly.
But he'll at least be, hey, he's in good shape. He's eating right. He's going to the gym, that kind of stuff is what I'm talking about.
He's not going to show up 285 pounds.
No. I mean, unless he just doesn't want to do anything. I mean, but I don't think Kahanu Kia doesn't strike me as that kind of kid.
No.
Or he's not going to show up 185 pounds. That's I think the bigger concern, right? Is the kid somewhere where he's not eating or he can't work out and stuff. He's in Raleigh, North Carolina. He's if he wants to work out and be in shape, he can be in shape. Yeah. So no doubt about it. So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you all so much for being with us today. We're going to be back tomorrow. It's going to be mailbag time. So there will be no IB Nation Sports Talk show tonight. There will be one tomorrow. They'll have their rapid fire tomorrow. And we'll be back tomorrow at 1:00 for our Friday free-for-all mailbag. So be ready with all your questions. So definitely look forward to our Q&A, obviously, tomorrow. And then, of course, Sean and I will be back on Saturday for our deal, our RTCF show. So thanks for being with us, everybody. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com, and check out all of our content at CFB Nation. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you again on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.